Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the strange customs of the ancient Babylonians. What you're about to discover might just change how you think about Hammurabi's famous code of laws and their surprising rituals for making sure justice had a personal touch. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Strap in, time traveler, because we're about to drop you right into the bustling, dusty streets of ancient Babylon, circa 500 BCE. This isn't your run-of-the-mill historical tour. Forget the pyramids and pharaohs. We're diving headfirst into the wild world of marriage auctions. Yep, you heard that right. While you might be used to swiping left or right, the Babylonians had their own version of matchmaking, and it involved bidding wars and a whole lot of silver shekels. Now, before you start romanticizing this as a kind of ancient bachelor episode, let's pump the brakes. This was less about candlelit dinners and more about cold, hard economics. The Babylonians were practical folks. They had a knack for turning everyday life into an economic opportunity, and marriage was no exception. You could say they were the original economists, long before Adam Smith made it cool. Picture yourself standing in front of a lively crowd, where the auctioneer is rattling off numbers faster than you can say, dowry. It's not the kind of auction where you walk away with a vintage vase. It's one where young women were essentially auctioned off to the highest bidder. But let's not get lost in the drama just yet. The key here is to understand what this was really about: wealth distribution. In Babylon, the marriage auction was a well-oiled machine designed to redistribute wealth across society. It wasn't just about finding a partner, but rather how wealth moved from one family to another, ensuring everyone got a slice of the pie. Imagine a society where this practice was pivotal to economic stability. It's like a stock exchange, but instead of trading shares, they traded matrimonial alliances. The way it worked was surprisingly systematic. Young women were lined up and auctioned off, starting with the most desirable and working down the line. The proceeds from the sale of the more attractive women were then used to provide dowries for those who were less favored by society's superficial standards. It's a system that might make you cringe today, but back then, it was considered a way to ensure that everyone, regardless of looks or status, could find a match. So, what's the catch? Well, it's more parasitic than it is picturesque. The myth of the marriage auction is often painted with a romantic brush, as if it were a quaint tradition of the past. But peel back the layers, and you'll find a stark contrast to our modern dating shows. At least on TV, contestants get to choose if they want to accept the rose. In Babylon, choice wasn't exactly on the menu. Let's get into some juicy numbers. The Babylonians dealt in silver shekels, and a typical bride price could range anywhere from 20 to 50 shekels, depending on various factors like beauty, family status, and, yes, even intelligence. To put that into perspective, a skilled artisan might earn about 10 shekels a year. So, if you were on the bidding side, you'd better have deep pockets or a very convincing sales pitch. And while we're talking economics, let's not forget the social hierarchy at play. The marriage auction was an equalizer of sorts, but not in the way you might hope. It was a reflection of societal values, where beauty and wealth were king. In modern terms, it's like if Tinder had a paywall, and only the richest or the most attractive profiles got swiped right. Of course, like any good historical custom, the marriage auction comes with a side of myth-busting. There's a tendency to romanticize the past, to see these customs as quaint relics of another time. But let's face it, this was no fairy tale. It was a system rooted in the realities of the day, where marriage was less about love and more about economic alliances. The Babylonians were pragmatists, and love, well, that was just icing on the cake if it happened to show up. You might wonder why this practice persisted. It wasn't just about money. It was about maintaining social order. In a time when social mobility was about as common as a solar eclipse, marriage was a way to keep the peace, to ensure that everyone had a part to play in the grand scheme of things. The auctions were a public affair, a community event that reinforced societal norms and values. To wrap it up, the Babylonian marriage auction was a complex dance of economics, social order, and yes, some degree of human connection. It's a stark reminder that history isn't always as glamorous as we want it to be. But in its own way, it tells us a lot about how humans have always used systems to navigate the tricky waters of relationships and resources. So next time you're flipping through channels and land on a dating show, remember that the Babylonians were there first, and their version came with a hefty price tag. Now, speaking of hefty price tags, let's take a sharp turn from the marriage market to the celestial marketplace of omens and divination. Buckle up, because the Babylonians were just as invested in the stars as they were in silver shekels. You've heard of astrology, right? Those daily horoscopes that sometimes seem eerily accurate or hilariously off the mark. Well, the Babylonians were the original stargazers, and they took it to a whole new level. Picture the scene. You're in Babylon, and the sky is a sprawling tapestry of twinkling stars. But to the Babylonian priests, this wasn't just an evening spectacle. It was a divine spreadsheet. These guys kept meticulous records of celestial events, noting every lunar eclipse, planetary conjunction, and unusual meteor shower. They were the ancient world's data analysts, convinced that the heavens held the key to earthly events. And let's not forget, they were more than happy to share their insights, for a price, of course. The notion that celestial events influenced human affairs wasn't just a passing fancy. It was a cornerstone of Babylonian society. Priests would pore over their records like Wall Street analysts on a caffeine high, trying to decipher what Jupiter's position meant for next season's barley crop, or how Venus's alignment might affect the king's next military campaign. It was a cosmic guessing game, part science, part art, and a whole lot of theater. Now, before we start romanticizing these stargazers as ancient visionaries, let's sprinkle some reality dust on this celestial show. While it's tempting to think of them as wise sages with a heartline to the gods, their interpretations often had more to do with guesswork than divine insight. Sure, they recorded astronomical phenomena with impressive accuracy. Let's give them that. But their predictions were often as reliable as your average fortune cookie. Take, for example, the famous Venus tablets of Misadventures, a series of records from the 7th century BCE detailing the planet Venus's movements. The Babylonians believed Venus had a direct line to the divine, her appearance signaling everything from impending doom to bumper harvests. Yet, despite their detailed observations, the interpretations were often hit or miss. One tablet might declare Venus's visibility as a sign of prosperity, while another could read the same event as a harbinger of disaster. It's like they were throwing cosmic dice and hoping for the best. And speaking of best guesses, let's tackle the myth of infallible ancient wisdom. The Babylonians were skilled astronomers, no doubt, but even the sharpest minds of their time couldn't predict the future with certainty. Their celestial interpretations were a mix of educated guesses and societal expectations. Much like today's horoscopes that seem tailor-made for everyone and no one at the same time, Babylonian divination was as much about the beliefs of the people as it was about the stars themselves. But hey, who can blame them? In a world where the unknown was vast and terrifying, seeking guidance from the heavens was a way to bring a semblance of control and order. It was a cosmic coping mechanism, a way to navigate the unpredictable seas of life. And let's not forget the economic angle. These interpretations were a commodity, a service rendered by the priestly class to kings and commoners alike, often with a nice little fee attached. So, what can we learn from these starry-eyed Babylonians? For starters, their obsession with omens and divination tells us a lot about the human condition. It's a reminder that, despite all our technological advances, the desire to find meaning in the chaos of life is as ancient as civilization itself. Whether it's consulting the stars or checking your daily horoscope app, humans have always been drawn to the idea that there's a cosmic plan, a grand design that we can somehow decipher. In the end, the Babylonian pursuit of celestial knowledge was a blend of science, superstition, and savvy economics. It was a vibrant tapestry of belief and skepticism, a dance between the known and the unknown. And while we might chuckle at their more outlandish predictions, there's something undeniably human in their quest to understand the universe and their place within it. So, next time you gaze up at the night sky, remember that those ancient Babylonians were doing the same, searching for answers in the stars, just as we do today. Now that we've star-hopped across the ancient Babylonian sky, let's crash back down to Earth, or rather, the dusty, law-obsessed streets of Babylon, circa 1750 BCE. Enter the Code of Hammurabi, the OG rulebook of eye for an eye justice. Picture a world where the laws didn't just keep the peace, they were etched into stone for all eternity, like an ancient Yelp review of society's do's and don'ts. Hammurabi, the sixth king of the first Babylonian dynasty, wasn't just any ruler. He was a legal eagle with a flair for the dramatic. His code, a collection of 282 laws, was carved into a massive diorite stele, standing a good 7 feet tall, a literal pillar of justice towering over the populace. Forget about calling your lawyer. In Babylon, the law was as in your face as a pop-up ad. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The code is as brutal as it is famous. You steal a sheep. Congratulations, you're now short a hand. It wasn't just about punishment but deterrence, a legal system turned up to 11. This was Hammurabi's version of tough on crime, with penalties that would make even the most hardcore disciplinarian wince. The code's most famous tenet, the lex talionis, or the law of retaliation, was less about fairness and more about balancing the cosmic scales of justice. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, literally. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just about punishment. The Code of Hammurabi laid down the law in areas like trade, labor, and family life, showing us that even in antiquity, life was a complex web of obligations and rights. For instance, if a builder's shoddy construction led to a house collapse and a death, the builder paid with his life. Talk about high stakes in real estate. It was a legal system obsessed with accountability, with the stakes often life or death. The societal backdrop necessitating such laws was equally fascinating. Babylon was a melting pot of cultures and classes, a bustling hub where the economy was as diverse as the people strolling its streets. This was a civilization that understood the need for a cohesive set of rules to manage its complexity, like a cosmic traffic cop guiding the flow of trade and social interactions. Without a clear legal framework, it would have been chaos, a free-for-all of biblical proportions. Yet, despite its harshness, the Code of Hammurabi was revolutionary for its time. It introduced the concept of presumption of innocence, a legal principle still cherished today. Accusers had to present evidence, and penalties were carefully outlined, setting a precedent for future legal systems. It was a balance of power and protection, ensuring that justice, while severe, was also a known quantity. Now, let's tackle the myth-making. The Code of Hammurabi is often romanticized as the foundation of justice, a beacon of fairness in a barbaric world. But don't get too starry-eyed. This wasn't the Magna Carta. It was a system rigged in favor of the elite, where social status played a significant role in determining one's fate. The punishment for harming a nobleman was far harsher than for harming a commoner, revealing a society deeply entrenched in class distinctions. And let's not forget the economic dimension. Babylonian laws were as much about protecting economic interests as they were about doling out justice. The code regulated wages, prices, and even family obligations, ensuring economic stability in a society where every shekel counted. Imagine living in a world where the law dictated how much you could charge for a loaf of bread or the price of a cow. It was a legal framework that saw the economy and justice as two sides of the same coin. Yet, despite its draconian reputation, the Code of Hammurabi was a product of its time, a time when maintaining order was a matter of survival. It was a system designed to enforce societal norms and protect the status quo, mirror reflecting the values and fears of an ancient civilization. But as much as we might cringe at its harshness, there's an undeniable allure to its clarity and decisiveness, a no-nonsense approach to justice that leaves no room for ambiguity. So, what do we take away from this legal roller coaster? The Code of Hammurabi is a stark reminder of how far we've come and how much we've retained. It's a testament to humanity's eternal quest for order amid chaos, a reminder that the rule of law is both a shield and a sword. And while we might balk at its severity today, the Code's legacy continues to resonate, echoing through the corridors of history as a foundational step in our ongoing journey toward justice and fairness. As we wrap up this legal tour, remember that the story doesn't end here. Babylonian justice was a complex beast, and the Code of Hammurabi is but one chapter in a long saga of law and order. So, if your legal pad's handy, because our exploration of ancient Babylon is far from over. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricate tapestry of this fascinating civilization, where every law, every custom, and every stone-carved commandment tells a story. But let's shift gears from the law courts to the doctor's office, or what passed for one in ancient Babylon. If you think modern healthcare is a head-scratcher, imagine a world where your liver could predict your future. Welcome to the wacky world of Babylonian medicine, a curious blend of cutting-edge healthcare and eyebrow-raising rituals. First off, let's talk diagnostics. If you wandered into a Babylonian clinic complaining of a headache, don't expect a polite inquiry about your stress levels. Instead, you might find a priest/doctor slicing open a sheep's liver. Why? Because the liver was seen as the universe's cheat sheet. By examining its shape and color, they believed they could divine your fate and figure out whether those migraines meant you were destined for greatness or just too much sun. Ah yes, the liver, the ancient Babylonian crystal ball. But don't start rolling your eyes just yet. While it sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, there was a method to this madness. They had a whole set of clay models to help interpret the divine messages supposedly nestled in that organ. It was part science, part showmanship, and all Babylonian. These liver models, known as hepatoscopy, were essentially the MRI machines of their day, minus the radiation and hefty hospital bills. Now, let's not pretend this was all make-believe. While the liver readings might have been more guesswork than genuine science, some Babylonian treatments were surprisingly effective. Take their approach to antiseptics, for example. They used beer and wine, not just for a good time, but to clean wounds. Alcohol's antiseptic properties were a happy accident, and who can blame them for mixing medicine with a bit of merriment? And how about their knowledge of plants? Babylonian healers were herbalists before herbalism was cool. They concocted potions from ingredients like myrrh and mandrake, plants that had actual therapeutic properties. Myrrh, for instance, was used to treat infections, while mandrake was employed as a painkiller. It's like the ancient version of a trip to Whole Foods, but with fewer kale smoothies and more incantations. But wait, it wasn't all flowers and liver readings. Here comes the part where we separate the scientific wheat from the superstitious chaff. For every herbal remedy that worked, there was a treatment that was, shall we say, less grounded in reality. Got a toothache? Forget the dentist. Instead, try chanting a spell while holding a dead mouse against your jaw. It's not clear whether this was meant to distract you with its sheer absurdity, or if they genuinely thought rodents had healing powers. And what about seizures? Today, we know they're neurological events, but back then, they were seen as demonic possessions. The cure, an exorcism, naturally. The Babylonian healers would perform elaborate rituals to drive out the evil spirits, sometimes involving animal sacrifices or even a bit of dance. Move over, modern medicine. These guys had rhythm. One can't help but chuckle at the mix of logic and lunacy, but remember that these practices tell us a lot about the human condition. They reveal a society grappling with the unknown, doing its best to turn fear into understanding. For the Babylonians, medicine wasn't just about healing the body. It was about navigating the mysteries of life with whatever tools they had at their disposal. The economic angle here is also worth noting. Medicine in Babylon was a business, and healers were often paid in goods, like barley or wool. If your treatment involved a particularly elaborate liver reading or a complex herbal concoction, you might end up parting with a month's worth of grain. It was healthcare with a hefty price tag. Sound familiar? So, what's the takeaway from this ancient clinic visit? Babylonian medicine was a reflection of its time, a blend of newfound knowledge and age-old superstition. It was a testament to human ingenuity and the lengths we'll go to in our quest for wellness. Sure, they didn't always hit the mark, but they laid the groundwork for future generations of healers and scientists. As we wrap up this medical detour, keep in mind that the story of Babylonian healthcare doesn't end here. There's more to explore, from their surgical techniques to the societal implications of their medical practices. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating tapestry of Babylonian life, where every liver reading and herbal remedy tells a story as rich and complex as the civilization itself. So, as we dust off the last remnants of Babylonian healthcare from our sandals, let's take a stroll down the shadowy lane of death rituals in ancient Babylon. Trust me, this isn't your average stroll through the cemetery. We're talking about a spectacle that puts modern funerals to shame with its blend of drama, economics, and a touch of the macabre. Death in Babylon was less an ending and more of a grand finale. Think of it as the societal equivalent of a Broadway production, complete with acts, costumes, and a cast of characters. When a Babylonian passed on, it wasn't just a family affair. It was a community event that could rival today's red carpet galas. The reason? Well, it all boils down to the Babylonian obsession with legacy and the afterlife. They believed that a proper send-off ensured the deceased's happiness in the netherworld, and who wouldn't want to keep the ancestors content? Now, let's talk logistics. The Babylonian funeral procession was an elaborate affair, complete with mourners, musicians, and yes, professional wailers. You heard that right, people who were paid to lament. If you think the Kardashians have mastered the art of public drama, they've got nothing on these ancient mourners. Hired to amplify the grief, these pros could turn even the most stoic gathering into a tear-soaked spectacle. It wasn't just about honoring the dead. It was about showing the living just how much you cared, or at least how much you could afford to care. Because in Babylon, mourning was a status symbol, and nothing said, "I'm a big deal," like a chorus of paid lamenters. Economically speaking, death was a booming business. Tombs, or ekaru, weren't just final resting places. They were status markers. The wealthier you were, the more elaborate your tomb, complete with intricate carvings and inscriptions. It was like commissioning your personal mausoleum, a stark reminder that in Babylon, wealth followed you to the grave. The cost of these eternal abodes could be astronomical. We're talking years' worth of income for the average Babylonian, as building one could cost anywhere from 50 to 100 shekels, depending on the craftsmanship and materials. If you were a high-ranking official or royalty, your tomb might be adorned with precious metals and stones. Meanwhile, commoners had to settle for more modest accommodations, perhaps a simple clay sarcophagus without the bling. But before you start picturing these tombs as dusty, forgotten relics, think again. The Babylonians believed in regularly visiting and maintaining these resting places. Tomb maintenance was an ongoing expense, ensuring that the deceased were kept company and their memory alive. It was an early form of legacy management, part honor, part social obligation. In a society where family lineage was everything, maintaining ancestral tombs was akin to keeping up with the Joneses, a perpetual race for posthumous prestige. And let's not forget the social implications. The elaborate funerals and tombs were a way for families to assert their status and ensure their legacy. In a world where your social standing was as vital as your heartbeat, these rituals were both a reflection of and a contribution to one's societal position. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of today's social media posts, a curated display of one's life and achievements, designed to impress and outlast. Now, let's debunk a common myth. The idea that these lavish funerals were purely acts of honor and devotion. While love and respect for the deceased certainly played a role, the truth is, these customs were as much about the living as they were about the dead. They reinforced social hierarchies and economic disparities, reminding everyone of their place in the grand scheme of things. It was less about the afterlife and more about the here and now, a testament to the Babylonian knack for turning even the most solemn occasion into a statement of wealth and power. But let's not paint the Babylonians as entirely cynical. There was genuine belief in the importance of these rituals, a conviction that honoring one's ancestors brought good fortune to the living. It was a society deeply connected to its past, where the dead played an active role in the lives of the living. This connection to ancestry was a cornerstone of Babylonian identity, something that modern genealogists might find enviable. So, what does all of this tell us about the Babylonians? Well, their death rituals reveal a culture that was as complex as the bricks in their ziggurats. They were pragmatic, using death as a way to navigate social and economic landscapes, but they were also deeply spiritual, believing in the power of legacy and remembrance. It's a reminder that human nature, with all its contradictions, is timeless. Even in death, the Babylonians managed to bridge the gap between the mundane and the mystical, leaving behind a legacy as enduring as their bricks and mortar. As we wrap up our journey through Babylonian customs, from marriage auctions to celestial divination, one thing is clear. The Babylonians understood the art of turning everyday life into a narrative of significance. They were masters of the grand gesture, whether it was charting the stars or building a tomb. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring human desire to find meaning and order, to leave a mark that echoes through time. So next time you find yourself pondering the stars, navigating the complexities of love and marriage, or considering your own legacy, spare a thought for the Babylonians. They walked these paths long before us, with a flair for the dramatic and a practicality that would make any modern economist proud. Their story, like ours, is one of navigating the spaces between the known and the unknown, the temporal and the eternal. And in that journey, we find a reflection of ourselves, a reminder that the quest for meaning is as ancient as civilization itself. In the bustling chaos of ancient Mesopotamia, where rivers were the highways and ziggurats the skyscrapers, a young man named Hammurabi was learning the ropes of ruling. And by ropes, I mean a tangled mess of alliances, backstabbing, and enough intrigue to make a soap opera look like a documentary. Hammurabi didn't just waltz into power. He sauntered in, probably with a knowing smirk and a mental checklist of potential rivals to outsmart. This was 1792 BCE, and Babylon wasn't yet the jewel of the Fertile Crescent. It was more like a promising upstart in a neighborhood full of grumpy old-timers. Hammurabi's early life wasn't exactly the stuff of legend, at least at first glance. No prophecies carved into stone tablets announcing his greatness. No divine intervention. Just a lot of political maneuvering, as his father, Sin-Muballit, gradually built up Babylon's prominence. Hammurabi learned from the best, watching his father navigate the perilous waters of ancient politics, where a wrong move could leave a city-state in ruins faster than you could say Sumerian cuneiform. Now, let's talk about Mesopotamia's political landscape, a place that makes Game of Thrones look like child's play. The region was a patchwork quilt of city-states, each with its own ambitions, and enough grudges to keep therapists busy for centuries. Think Lagash, and Isin, all jostling for power, their rulers ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. If you were a king back then, you didn't just need a crown. You needed eyes in the back of your head and a talent for telling friend from foe, skills Hammurabi would prove to possess in spades. When Hammurabi took the throne, he was stepping into a role that required not just leadership, but a fair bit of showmanship. The Mesopotamian rulers weren't just political heads, they were part-time deities. You had to convince people that your rule was divinely ordained, while also managing the practicalities of governance, kind of like being a rock star and an accountant rolled into one. But unlike the myth of the all-knowing ruler, Hammurabi was more about strategy than stagecraft. Picture him less as a godlike figure, and more as that charming politician at a cocktail party, deftly working the room, making allies, and subtly sidelining potential threats. Hammurabi's Babylon wasn't just about building monumental architecture, it was about constructing a legacy. In the early years, he focused on infrastructure, canals, fortifications, and roads, laying the groundwork for a city that would soon dominate the region. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just about bricks and mortar. These projects were strategic moves in an ongoing chess game, enhancing trade, ensuring agricultural productivity, and most importantly, solidifying his power base. The challenges Hammurabi faced were as daunting as they were numerous. Rival cities eyed Babylon's growing influence with suspicion, and alliances were as stable as a sandcastle at high tide. Yet, Hammurabi's savvy lay in his ability to turn these challenges into opportunities. He wasn't a warmonger by nature. Instead, he preferred diplomacy and the occasional well-timed military campaign to expand his influence. One of the myths worth debunking is the idea of Hammurabi as an infallible ruler. Sure, history remembers him as the lawgiver, the creator of one of the earliest and most complete written legal codes. But let's not kid ourselves. The man was human, prone to the same missteps and misjudgments as any leader. His brilliance lay in his ability to navigate those missteps, turning potential failures into stepping stones. Hammurabi's rise to power wasn't just a tale of ambition and strategy. It was a testament to his understanding of the intricate dance of politics. In a land where allegiances shifted like desert sands, he managed to unite disparate city-states into a cohesive empire. It wasn't magic or divine favor. It was sheer political acumen, and maybe a little luck, because let's face it, even the best-laid plans could go awry in ancient Mesopotamia. As we delve deeper into Hammurabi's legacy, it's crucial to remember that the world he inhabited was one of stark realities and practicalities. The romanticized image of an all-powerful ruler is just that, a romanticization. The truth is, Hammurabi was a master of the art of persuasion and negotiation, a leader who understood that the pen, or stylus in his case, could indeed be mightier than the sword. In the grand tapestry of history, his story is one of strategy, wit, and a keen understanding of human nature, qualities that cemented his legacy and set the stage for the Babylonian Empire's golden age. And now, let's pivot from Hammurabi, the savvy power player, to Hammurabi, the legal visionary, or, depending on your perspective, the ultimate control freak. Enter the Code of Hammurabi, a fascinating artifact of ancient governance and one of history's earliest known legal codes. Picture a massive black stone stele, nearly as tall as a modern NBA player, standing at about 7 feet 4 inches. This imposing monolith weighs approximately 4 tons, a testament not just to Babylonian craftsmanship, but to the seriousness with which Hammurabi viewed his laws. It's the ancient equivalent of carving your message in stone, because that's precisely what it was. Inscribed with 282 laws, the Code of Hammurabi is like a time capsule of Babylonian life, detailing everything from trade regulations to family law. While many of us have heard of its infamous eye for an eye decree, the code goes far beyond retributive justice. It's a legal smorgasbord, with laws addressing the nitty-gritty of daily life, covering everything from the wages of an ox driver to the proper conduct of tavern keepers. Yes, folks, there were rules for how to run a bar in ancient Babylon. You could almost imagine Hammurabi popping in for a pint, scowling at the rowdy patrons, and declaring, "There ought to be a law," before jotting down his next decree. Now, before we label Hammurabi as the world's first micromanager, let's consider the context. Babylon was a burgeoning empire, and maintaining order required more than just military might or clever diplomacy. Hammurabi needed a cohesive framework to govern a diverse population of traders, farmers, craftsmen, and nobles. His code was like a multi-tool for rulers, designed to standardize justice, and perhaps more importantly, to project his authority. It was a public declaration that his rule was not just about conquest, but about fairness, or at least his version of it. And let's not forget the economic angle. A predictable legal system can do wonders for trade, as merchants prefer dealing in regions where rules are clear and consistent. So, Hammurabi's code wasn't just about justice. It was about creating a stable environment for commerce to flourish. But don't get too carried away romanticizing this as some ancient precursor to modern democracy. The code's justice was anything but blind. Social hierarchy played a significant role, with different punishments for the same crime depending on one's social status. If a nobleman put out the eye of another noble, it was eye for an eye. If he blinded a commoner, he might just pay a fine. It's a stark reminder that equality under the law is a relatively modern concept, and that ancient justice was unapologetically hierarchical. The perks of being a Babylonian elite, where breaking the rules didn't necessarily mean breaking the bank. The Code of Hammurabi also offers a fascinating glimpse into the gender dynamics of the time. Women in Babylon had more rights than one might expect for the era, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. While women could own property, run businesses, and even get a divorce, the laws were still very much written from a patriarchal perspective. In cases of divorce, for instance, a woman needed to prove her worthiness to retain her dowry. If she couldn't, well, she was sent packing without a penny. Hammurabi might have been progressive for his time, but gender equality wasn't exactly on his to-do list. One of the most intriguing aspects of the code is its sheer breadth. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about setting expectations and creating a societal contract. It detailed the penalties for false accusations, the rules for adopting children, and even the responsibilities of shepherds. It's as if Hammurabi was saying, "Look, folks, if we're going to build this empire, we need to get on the same page," literally. This wasn't just a legal code. It was a blueprint for civilization as imagined by Hammurabi. Now, here's a myth worth debunking: the idea that Hammurabi's code was universally enforced and adhered to. The reality was far messier. Some historians speculate that the laws were more aspirational than practical, with local customs often taking precedence. The code's grandiose declarations might have been as much about propaganda as they were about governance, a way for Hammurabi to legitimize his rule and leave a legacy. After all, what better way to cement your place in history than by inscribing your vision of justice on a giant stone for future generations to ponder? In the end, Hammurabi's code was a double-edged sword, both a tool of governance and a symbol of control. It was a bold attempt to bring order to chaos, to carve out a space where laws could be reliable, if not entirely equitable. And while we might chuckle at the notion of ancient Babylonian tavern regulations, the code serves as a poignant reminder of humanity's ongoing quest to balance power, justice, and ambition. As we continue to unravel Hammurabi's legacy, let's keep in mind that the stones of history are often built on both brilliance and imperfection. But hey, at least Hammurabi knew how to make an impression, one law at a time. So, as Hammurabi etched his name into history with those laws, Babylon was busy being transformed from a city of clay bricks to a thriving metropolis with some serious street cred. Let's dive into how those legal codes went beyond just keeping the peace and actually shaped the socio-economic structure of Babylon. Think of it as ancient urban planning, but with more drama and a touch of divine right. First up, property rights. Hammurabi's code was all about laying down the law on who owned what and who owed whom. In a world where land was as valuable as gold, and unlike gold, you couldn't just stash it under your mattress. Clear property laws were essential. Hammurabi's laws detailed everything from land sales to rental agreements. For instance, if you were a farmer leasing land, you had to pay a fixed rent, often in the form of grain. Miss a payment, and you'd better hope your neighbors were feeling generous. This was Hammurabi's way of ensuring that the wheels of agriculture kept turning, feeding the city's growing appetite and Kaffirs alike. And speaking of appetites, let's talk trade. Babylon was smack dab, in the middle of some of the most lucrative trade routes of the ancient world. Hammurabi's laws set standards for weights and measures, ensuring merchants weren't pulling a fast one with dodgy scales. Picture it, a bustling market, traders haggling over the price of textiles and spices, and somewhere in the background, Hammurabi's stone monolith standing watch like the world's sternest mall cop. By standardizing trade practices, Hammurabi wasn't just keeping the peace. He was boosting Babylon's economy, ensuring that merchants from far and wide knew they could trade fairly in his city. But wait, there's more. The Code of Hammurabi also delved into family law, which, let's be honest, was more about maintaining social order than promoting familial bliss. Marriages were as much about contracts as they were about love, if not more so. The laws outlined dowries, inheritance rights, and even the consequences of infidelity. If a wife was caught cheating, she might find herself tossed into the river. Literally. It was a sort of ancient trial by water, where surviving the ordeal was considered proof of innocence. Talk about a splashy defense strategy, right? Then there's the classic you break it, you buy it rule. Or in Hammurabi's code, more like you break it, you pay for it, passably with your life. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder would be executed. A bit harsh, perhaps, but it certainly kept the construction standards high. Some might call it extreme quality assurance, others, a medieval approach to consumer protection. Hammurabi's laws even had provisions for professions we don't typically associate with ancient times. Take the tavern keepers, for example. They were forbidden from overcharging customers or watering down beer. Violating these laws could lead to drowning. Yes, drowning. It seems Hammurabi had a bit of a theme going with the water-based punishments. Maybe he just had a thing against bad booze. On a more serious note, while these laws might seem draconian, they were all part of Hammurabi's grand scheme. He was crafting a society where everyone knew their place, their rights, and their responsibilities. Or, at least, they were supposed to. By cementing these rules in stone, Hammurabi was carving out a new world order, one where justice wore the king's seal. His legal codes were like the ancient precursor to a social contract, a set of expectations that bound the people of Babylon to a common framework, albeit one that was heavily skewed in favor of the elite. And let's not forget the economic implications. By ensuring that the rules were clear, Hammurabi was fostering an environment where commerce could thrive. Property rights and trade regulations were crucial for stability, encouraging investment and growth. Babylon wasn't just a city, it was an economic powerhouse, and Hammurabi's laws were the gears that kept it all running smoothly. But before we get too misty-eyed about Hammurabi's contributions, let's remember that his code wasn't exactly a beacon of equality. It was a reflection of a society deeply divided by class. The law was much kinder to the wealthy and the freeborn than it was to slaves and commoners. Punishments varied based on social status, and justice was a privilege, not a right. So while Hammurabi might have been a visionary, he wasn't a revolutionary. His laws were about maintaining the status quo as much as they were about creating order. In the end, the Code of Hammurabi was more than just a list of do's and don'ts. It was a blueprint for a society on the rise, a city-state poised to leave its mark on history. Hammurabi's legal legacy was one of control and cohesion, a testament to the power of the written word in shaping civilizations. As we continue to unravel the layers of his influence, we'll see just how far-reaching his impact truly was. But for now, let's savor the irony. Hammurabi, king who ruled with an iron fist, has become a symbol of law and justice. It's a legacy built on stone, ambition, and enough water trials to make a modern-day legal drama look tame. And that, my friends, is how you secure a place in the annals of history, one stele at a time. And speaking of Hammurabi's knack for making a lasting impression, let's pivot from his stone-carved legal legacy to his real-world chessboard, the ever-turbulent land of ancient Mesopotamia. Picture a landscape where every city-state was a pawn, knight, or bishop, and where Hammurabi aimed to be the grandmaster, or at least the guy who knew when to flip the board. Now, Hammurabi's military campaigns weren't about swinging swords and rousing speeches. Those were for the bards. Instead, imagine strategic maneuvers that would make a modern defense analyst nod in approval. His reign saw Babylon's territory grow from a modest city to an empire stretching about 500 miles from the Persian Gulf to the Zagros Mountains, a feat that would have made even a Roman general raise an eyebrow. But was Hammurabi a strategic genius, or just someone who knew how to roll the dice and come up with double sixes? The truth, as always, is murkier than a Mesopotamian canal during a drought. Hammurabi's campaigns were a mix of careful planning and sheer opportunism. Take, for example, his dealings with the city of Larsa. It wasn't just a grab for land. Larsa was like the ancient equivalent of a tech startup with a monopoly on the latest irrigation techniques. By annexing it in 1763 BCE, Hammurabi gained vital agricultural resources that would feed his burgeoning empire, and more importantly, fill his coffers. But let's not paint Hammurabi some benevolent ruler who merely wanted to feed his people. His expansionist policies were driven by the harsh economic realities of the time. Babylon's growing population needed grain, and his soldiers needed paychecks, or at least enough barley and beer to keep them happy. Conquering Larsa was like hitting a double jackpot. Control over irrigation meant increased agricultural output, and subjugating an enemy city meant one less rival to worry about. And then there was the city of Mari, a key player on the Euphrates trade route. Hammurabi's conquest of Mari wasn't just about territorial gain. It was a strategic move to control the flow of goods and information. In 1761 BCE, he captured the city, and with it, a treasure trove of trade connections and diplomatic correspondence. The latter was particularly juicy, offering Hammurabi insights into the political machinations of his rivals. It was the ancient equivalent of hacking into a competitor's email server, except with more clay tablets and less digital espionage. Hammurabi's military prowess also extended to his ability to forge alliances, only to break them when the winds of fortune shifted. His political relationship with the city-state of Eshnunna is a case in point. Initially allies against the powerful Elamites, Hammurabi and Eshnunna were like best friends in a sitcom, until the plot twist. When Eshnunna became a threat, Hammurabi turned on them faster than you can say diplomatic immunity, subduing the city and adding its resources to his collection. But let's not romanticize Hammurabi's cunning too much. His methods weren't always about brain over brawn. Sometimes they were just about having a bigger stick. The city of Uruk, for example, fell not because of some ingenious ploy, but simply because Hammurabi had amassed a formidable army. By 1750 BCE, he had effectively turned Babylon into the neighborhood's big bully, the kind that demanded your lunch money, and then some. So, was Hammurabi a master strategist, or just a guy with good timing and a bit of luck? Probably a bit of both. After all, even the best-laid plans need a sprinkle of fortune to succeed. His campaigns were a blend of calculated risks and opportunistic grabs, proving that in the Game of Thrones, Mesopotamian edition, it's not just about making the right moves, but knowing when to make them. Now, let's talk about what Hammurabi's conquests actually meant for Babylon. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about painting more territory on the map. Control over cities like Larsa, Mari, and Uruk meant access to critical resources like grain and trade routes, fueling Babylon's transformation into a thriving economic powerhouse. It wasn't just the capital of an empire. It was the ancient world's Wall Street, with Hammurabi as its savvy CEO. The spoils of war also meant more than just material wealth. Hammurabi's empire-building efforts led to the cultural and intellectual exchange that would define Babylon as a center of innovation. The conquered cities brought with them their own traditions, technologies, and ideas, contributing to a melting pot of cultures that would shape the region for centuries. It was a sort of ancient Mesopotamian globalization, with Babylon at the heart of it all. But here's the kicker. While we might celebrate Hammurabi as a great unifier, his empire was less a harmonious union and more a delicate balancing act. The conquered territories were like a patchwork quilt, each piece stitched together by the thread of Hammurabi's authority. His rule relied on maintaining a precarious equilibrium, one that depended on his ability to keep both his subjects and his enemies guessing. And therein lies the rub. Hammurabi's empire wasn't a stable monolith. It was a house of cards, vulnerable to the slightest breeze of dissent or rebellion. His legacy, though grand, was also fragile, a testament to the challenges of ruling an empire built on both conquest and cunning. The very alliances that helped him expand his territory were as fleeting as the sands of the desert, and maintaining control required constant vigilance. As we dive deeper into the story of Hammurabi, it's clear that his legacy was more than just a collection of laws etched in stone. It was an empire shaped by ambition, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of power. His military exploits were a crucial chapter in the saga of Babylon, revealing a ruler who understood that the art of war was as much about playing the game as it was about winning it. The tale of Hammurabi is a reminder that history's greatest figures were often master manipulators, playing with the pieces they had while keeping an eye on the prize. His story is one of ambition and intrigue, of alliances forged and broken, and of an empire built on the shifting sands of power. As we continue to unravel the threads of his legacy, let's remember that even the mightiest empires are, at their core, a testament to the human penchant for both brilliance and folly. And as Hammurabi would undoubtedly agree, it's not just about making history, it's about making it last. Hammurabi's tale isn't just about a king with a knack for empire building. It's about the lasting imprint he left on the pages of history. And while his empire might have been held together with the ancient equivalent of duct tape and determination, his legacy as a lawgiver is anything but flimsy. Fast forward a few millennia, and you'll find echoes of Hammurabi's code reverberating through modern legal systems. This is where things get really interesting, because while we love our myths about divine wisdom and benevolent rulers, the reality is far more nuanced. First, let's talk about the legal legacy. Hammurabi's code isn't just a dusty relic of the past. It's a foundational text that laid the groundwork for legal principles we still see today. The idea of a written code of laws was revolutionary for its time, providing a standard by which justice could be meted out. Sure, the code may not have been enforced as rigorously as a hall monitor with a brand new whistle, but it set a precedent for the idea that laws should be recorded and accessible, a notion that's kind of important if you want to avoid total anarchy. Now, let's dive into specifics. The Code of Hammurabi introduced concepts like presumption of innocence and evidence-based trials, which are cornerstones of modern legal systems. If anything, Hammurabi was the original legal influencer, setting trends that would be followed by civilizations from ancient Rome to contemporary Western societies. His laws covered a wide swath of daily life, from trade and property rights to family law and personal injury. It's almost like he looked ahead and said, let's make sure we're not reinventing the wheel every time someone gets into a dispute over a goat. But hold on. Let's not get carried away with the idea that Hammurabi was some kind of proto-Enlightenment thinker. The code was as much about control as it was about justice. Remember, this was a time when the ruler's word was law, and the code was as much a tool for cementing Hammurabi's authority as it was for ensuring fairness. It was a way of saying, follow my rules, and we'll all get along just fine. Disobey, and you'll find yourself facing some truly medieval consequences. This brings us to the myth of Hammurabi's divine wisdom. It's tempting to picture him as this sage, all-knowing ruler whose laws were handed down from the gods. After all, the prologue to the code itself claims that Hammurabi was chosen by the gods to bring about justice. But let's be real, this was more about clever marketing than divine intervention. Hammurabi was a master of propaganda, using his supposed divine mandate to legitimize his rule and keep his subjects in line. It was a classic case of the gods made me do it, a tactic as old as time and just as effective. As we peel back the layers of myth, we find a ruler who was as human as the rest of us, navigating the complex web of power, politics, and human nature. His brilliance lay not in some otherworldly insight, but in his ability to adapt, negotiate, and yes, sometimes manipulate to maintain control and build a legacy that would outlast his empire. So what does this all mean for us today? Well, Hammurabi's story is a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts. We love our legends, our tales of great leaders and divine wisdom, but the truth is often as elusive as a well-hidden Easter egg. Hammurabi's legacy is a testament to the power of narrative, the enduring impact of written laws, and the age-old human tendency to weave myth and reality into a tapestry that we can hold up as a mirror to our own times. In the grand scheme of things, Hammurabi's legacy is like a stone dropped in a pond, sending ripples through the ages. His code might not have been perfect, far from it, but it was a starting point, a blueprint for the societies that followed. And while the world has changed beyond recognition since Hammurabi's time, the basic human need for order, justice, and a good old-fashioned legal dispute remains the same. As we wrap up this journey through the sands of time, let's not forget the irony. Hammurabi, a ruler who once etched his laws into stone, has become a symbol for the enduring power of the written word. His story is one of ambition, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of power. A story that reminds us of both our capacity for brilliance and our penchant for folly. And in the end, isn't that what history is all about? A messy, fascinating blend of myth and reality, where the truth is sometimes as hard to find as a lost steel in the sands of time. So here's to Hammurabi, the king who wrote himself into history one law at a time, and left a legacy that's as enduring as the stone upon which it was carved. The air is thick with the sound of clanging tools and the chatter of laborers. You're standing in the dust of the 5th century BCE, where the land is as rough as the politics. Forget any romantic images of an endless stone dragon snaking through the mountains. What you're dealing with here is a patchwork of walls, like a mismatched quilt thrown together by quarreling neighbors. Welcome to the Warring States period of China, where unity is more of a wish than a reality. Cue the cacophony of ambition and paranoia. 7 states, Qin, Chu, Zhao, Wei, Han, Yan, and Kai, are all trying to outmaneuver each other like participants in the world's deadliest chess game. Each state's got its own wall, its own problem with those pesky northern nomads, and its own idea of what security means. These early iterations are not the iconic stone behemoths you see on postcards, but rather earthen fortifications. Think rammed earth, literally dirt packed down so hard it laughs at erosion. It's cheap, local, and surprisingly effective for its time. Why the rush to build? Well, when you've got the Xingnu and other nomadic tribes breathing down your neck, you tend to get a tad anxious. These nomads aren't just your run-of-the-mill raiders. They're cavalry experts, masters of hit-and-run tactics, and they have a knack for showing up when you least expect it. So, walls become the go-to defense mechanism. It's less about keeping people out and more about slowing them down, giving your army time to scramble into action. But let's not kid ourselves. These were no small undertakings. Constructing these walls took an army of laborers, hundreds of thousands in fact, and this wasn't a cushy government job with benefits. We're talking forced labor, often involving peasants and prisoners who had about as much choice in the matter as a fish in a net. The cost, insane. The human cost, even more so. Families were torn apart, and people died in droves, their bones sometimes becoming part of the structure itself. Talk about leaving a legacy, right? Now, let's shatter another myth while we're at it. This was no single, continuous wall spanning the northern border of China. Nope. Each state built its own section, with varying degrees of competence and enthusiasm. It was less about creating a unified defensive line, and more about showing off each state's strength and determination. It's like a neighborhood rivalry where everyone keeps trying to one-up each other's fences. The result? A series of disconnected walls, each with its own quirks and flaws. But hey, it's the thought that counts, right? The Qin state, known for its ruthless efficiency, was particularly industrious. They took wall building to a new level, laying down some of the most formidable structures of the time. They were the overachievers in a class full of slackers, setting the stage for what would eventually become the Great Wall. And when the Qin dynasty finally unified China in 221 BCE, they had a head start on the wall-building game. But let's not jump the gun. That story's for another day. Back to our timeline, the idea of a wall wasn't just about defense. It was a statement. A big, bold, earthen exclamation mark saying, "We're here, we're strong, and we're not going anywhere." It was a physical manifestation of power and control, a way to assert dominance over both enemies and subjects. Because let's face it, a big wall is as much about intimidation as it is about security. And speaking of control, these early walls weren't just about keeping Mongols at bay. They were also about keeping people in, a handy tool for a ruler who wanted to make sure his subjects didn't get any funny ideas about running off to a more lenient neighbor. In a time when loyalty was as fickle as the wind, walls were an insurance policy against both external threats and internal rebellion. So, as you stand amidst the dust and determination of this era, remember that the Great Wall, in its infancy, was more about fragmented ambition than unified glory. It was a patchwork of political maneuvering and survival strategy, a testament to human tenacity, and yes, folly. Because in the end, no wall, earthen or otherwise, could fully protect against the relentless march of time and change. But it sure made one heck of a statement while trying. Fast forward to the Qin dynasty, where the scene shifts dramatically. Imagine the chaos of competing states finally settling into the grip of a single ruler, Emperor Qin Shi Huang. This guy didn't just unify China, he gave the concept of control freak a whole new dimension. Picture a teenager cleaning up after a house party, but on a colossal scale. Qin Shi Huang didn't just reorganize the furniture, he demolished walls and built them anew, and in doing so, he left a mark so indelible that we're still talking about it over 2 millennia later. Here's the kicker. While Qin Shi Huang gets credit for putting the great in the Great Wall, the real story is a tad less glamorous. Sure, he connected those mismatched state walls into something resembling a cohesive line, but this was no leisurely weekend project. It was a brutal, back-breaking endeavor that makes modern construction woes look like a stroll in the park. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of laborers, prisoners, peasants, and soldiers, all conscripted into service, as if they'd drawn the short straw in a cosmic lottery. They didn't have the luxury of OSHA to keep them safe, and their work environment was more death march than team-building exercise. The conditions, let's just say harsh, is an understatement. Imagine being dragged from your home, handed a shovel, and told to start digging until your hands bled. If you thought your last job was tough, think again. The workforce was subjected to grueling labor, often in extreme weather conditions. Surviving was as much about luck as it was about endurance. It's estimated that hundreds of thousands perished building the wall. And here's where we bust a myth. Contrary to popular belief, no bodies were intentionally buried within the wall. The idea of a wall lined with skeletons is more Gothic horror than historical fact. But the truth is grim enough. Those who died were often buried in mass graves nearby, their final resting places unmarked and forgotten. The logistics of constructing such a monumental feat were staggering. Imagine the supply chain challenges. Without modern machinery, everything was done by hand. The building materials varied depending on the terrain. In some areas, stone was abundant, while in others, workers resorted to the ancient technique of rammed earth, compacting soil so hard that it would mark erosion. The wall stretched thousands of miles across northern China, a serpentine barrier that was as much about keeping enemies out as it was about keeping restless subjects in. It was less a single, unbroken structure, and more an interconnected web of fortifications, watchtowers, and garrison stations. But But let's not forget the economic impact. Funding this massive undertaking was no small feat. If you think taxes are bad now, imagine living under the Qin regime. The wall was an economic black hole, swallowing resources with ravenous appetite. It wasn't just currency that was drained. It was manpower, food, and raw materials. If there had been a slogan like the Great Wall Tax, it would have been the PR disaster of the century. Nobody was thrilled about their hard-earned crops and labor being funneled into a colossal stone barrier. The economic burden was so severe that it contributed to the eventual downfall of the Qin dynasty. Talk about an unintentional self-sabotage. And yet, for all its brutality and cost, the wall was a statement of unprecedented ambition. It was Qin Shi Huang flexing his imperial muscles, a testament to his vision of a unified China that would stand the test of time. The wall didn't just symbolize defense. It was a declaration of unyielding power and authority. But while the wall may have stood strong, the dynasty it was meant to protect crumbled within a few decades. The Qin dynasty was short-lived, collapsing under its own weight and the oppressive policies that had once fueled its rise. In the end, what Qin Shi Huang created was both a marvel and a monument to human suffering. The Great Wall, for all its grandeur, was built on the backs of the forgotten, a testament to both human ingenuity and the darker side of ambition. As we stand back and gaze at this ancient wonder, it begs the question, was it worth the price? We'll leave that for another day, as the story of the Great Wall is not yet complete. There's more to uncover, more to question, and more truths waiting behind its ancient stones. So, the Qin dynasty fizzles out faster than a sparkler on New Year's Eve, leaving us with the Han dynasty, stepping up to bat in 206 BCE. The Han, they weren't just about filling the power vacuum. They were about making sure that China not only survived, but thrived. And what better way to do that than by turning a defensive wall into a bustling artery of trade and commerce? Enter the Silk Road. The Han dynasty had a vision. They saw the Great Wall not just as a formidable defense line, but as the perfect companion for the booming Silk Road, the ancient world's version of a mega mall. Picture caravans loaded with silk, spices, and other exotic goodies making their way toward Europe and the Middle East, bringing back glassware, horses, and ideas. You might think of the wall as a giant do not disturb sign, but the Han saw it more like a border checkpoint at a bustling international airport, minus the duty-free shops. Now, here's where the myth-busting kicks in again. The Great Wall is often hailed as the ultimate fortress, the impenetrable barrier against those northern invaders. But let's be real. The wall, despite its grandeur, was about as holy as Swiss cheese. It was never intended to be an impenetrable shield. Instead, it was all about delay tactics, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. And as for the invincible aura, it was more about projecting power and control, akin to slapping bumper stickers on your car that say, "My other car is a tank." The Han emperors were no fools. They knew that a thriving trade network was gold, literally. By expanding the wall and securing trade routes, they could safeguard the lifeblood of their economy and assert their dominance on the international stage. The wall became a symbol of strength, a towering testament to the Han's ability to protect and control the flow of goods and ideas. And let's not forget the technological advances that made this possible. The Han were pioneers of their time, introducing innovations like the wheelbarrow and advanced metallurgy, which helped streamline the construction and maintenance of this massive structure. And speaking of construction, let's talk numbers. The Han dynasty stretched the wall's reach to about 500 miles. That's like walking from New York to Los Angeles, and then walking halfway back. No small feat when you consider this was done without cranes, bulldozers, or even a decent pair of work boots. Laborers relied on sheer grit, determination, an impressive amount of elbow grease. The materials were as varied as a potluck dinner: stone, brick, wood, and tamped earth, all of which were sourced locally to cut down on transportation costs. Talk about being environmentally conscious before it was cool. Now, let's dig into the economics. The Silk Road wasn't just about silk. It was the original global marketplace, and the Han knew how to capitalize on it. By integrating the wall into this vast trade network, they could control and tax the movement of goods. The wall functioned like a toll booth on steroids, increasing the dynasty's coffers and solidifying its economic power. It was a shrewd move, turning what was once a costly defensive line into a cash cow. But hold on, let's not romanticize this too much. The wall wasn't all sunshine and prosperity. The economic motivations that drove its expansion also came with a hefty price tag. Funding such an ambitious project was no walk in the park. Taxation was high, sometimes cripplingly so, and the burden often fell on the shoulders of peasants who were already living on the edge. It was a delicate balancing act, maintaining the wall's upkeep and ensuring the economy didn't collapse under the weight of its own ambition. So, was the wall effective as a defense mechanism during Han times? Yes and no. It wasn't about keeping enemies out as much as it was about keeping the peace and maintaining control over vital trade routes. It served as a deterrent, a psychological barrier that loomed large in the minds of would-be invaders. But like any great monument, its true power lay in what it represented, a legacy of ambition, innovation, and the indomitable human spirit. And there you have it. The Han dynasty's not-so-secret weapon wasn't just stone and mortar. It was a strategic masterpiece of economic savvy and political acumen. The wall was more than a physical barrier. It was a statement of intent, a declaration of the Han's place in the world. And as with all great endeavors, it set the stage for the next chapter in China's history, where the wall would continue to evolve and inspire. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. There's more to this story, and it's far from over. As the Han dynasty's ambitions left their mark on the wall, time marched on, carrying us into the Ming dynasty, an era of high drama, political intrigue, and of course, stone. Fast forward to the late 14th century, and we're talking about a serious facelift for this ancient behemoth. The Ming dynasty didn't just dabble in wall renovations. They went all out, swapping out rammed earth for bricks and stone like a homeowner with a serious case of curb appeal fever. Let's get one thing straight. The Ming weren't just fussing over aesthetics. This overhaul was less about practicality and more about sending a message. Think of it as an ancient Instagram post. Look at us. We're still here, and we mean business. The Ming emperors wanted to project strength, stability, and a certain je ne sais quoi that said, "Don't even think about it," to any potential invaders, especially those pesky Mongols who just wouldn't take a hint. Before you get lost in visions of a seamless stone serpent winding its way serenely through the mountains, let's demystify a few things. The wall we recognize today isn't quite the monolithic structure of legend. Sure, it stretches over 13,000 miles, about the distance from New York to Sydney and back, just in case you're planning a road trip. But this wasn't some impenetrable barrier. It was more like a very long suggestion that said, "Invaders, please reconsider." The truth is, the Great Wall during the Ming era was as much about political theater as it was about defense. The real magic wasn't in stopping invaders cold. It was in buying time, slowing them down, and looking formidable while doing it. Think of it as a speed bump with an attitude. The Ming knew that a stone wall, no matter how high, wasn't going to be a one-stop-shop solution for border security. But boy, did it make a statement. And speaking of statements, one of the most persistent myths about the Great Wall is that it's visible from space. Spoiler alert, it's not. Sorry to burst that romantic bubble, but unless you have eagle eyes and a telescope, that wall remains firmly grounded in legend, not low Earth orbit. Sure, it's long, but it's also pretty narrow, and no more visible than your average highway. So, if you're an astronaut hoping for a glimpse, you might want to set your sights on something a bit more, well, visible. Now, let's dig into the Ming dynasty's motivations. Why invest so heavily in stone and brick? Well, the Ming were all about internal stability and border control. They needed to assert their dominance over a vast empire that was as politically complex as a soap opera plot. The wall was a tool for managing both external threats and internal unrest. It was less about keeping invaders out and more about keeping the empire together, a reassuring presence in a time of uncertainty. Economically, this was no small endeavor. Constructing the wall was like funneling resources into a black hole. The Ming government poured money, labor, and materials into the project with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. To fund this colossal undertaking, taxes were raised, labor was conscripted, and the empire's coffers were stretched to their limits. It was a bold move, and not without its detractors. If you think your tax dollars disappear into a void, imagine funding a wall so vast it could wrap around your country several times over. And let's not forget the human element. The Ming Wall was built by an army of laborers who toiled in conditions that would make your worst workday look like a vacation. This wasn't just a job. It was a test of endurance, with workers facing harsh weather, treacherous terrain, and the ever-present threat of exhaustion. The human cost was staggering, and while the myth of bodies buried within the wall persists, the reality is grim enough without embellishment. Those who didn't make it were often left in unmarked graves nearby, their contributions forgotten by history, but etched into the stones they laid. So why persist with such an arduous project? For the Ming, the wall was about more than just defense. It was a symbol of their resolve, a testament to their will to maintain control over a sprawling empire. It projected power both outwardly to potential invaders and inwardly to their own people. It was a statement of endurance, a reminder of the dynasty's strength and unity. Yet, for all its grandeur, the wall was also a reminder of the fragility of human ambition, a monument to the lengths we go to in order to maintain a semblance of control. And there you have it, the wall in the Ming dynasty, a breathtaking feat of engineering, a colossal political statement, and a testament to both human ingenuity and the limits of power. It stood as a guardian of the empire, but also as a reminder of the cost of ambition. The wall may not have been visible from space, but its impact on history is undeniable, and its story isn't finished yet. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more twists and turns in the ongoing saga of the Great Wall. And so, the Great Wall stands, a testament to ambition and endurance that echoes through time like the world's longest game of telephone. Fast forward to today, and it's not just a colossal reminder of past dynasties flexing their imperial muscles. It's a cultural icon, a monument woven into the very fabric of China's national identity. Over 10 million visitors a year flock to its ancient stones, eager to walk in the footsteps of history, even as they snap selfies and update their Instagram stories. Yet, while the wall's appeal is undeniable, its story is often tangled up in a tapestry of myths and misconceptions. Let's debunk one of the most enduring tall tales, the idea that the Great Wall is a single, continuous fortification. Sorry to burst your bubble, but it's more like a series of standalone masterpieces stitched together across centuries. Each section was built to meet the specific needs of the time, some to repel invaders, others to control trade routes, and some, quite frankly, to show off. It's like an ancient version of a reality TV show where each dynasty competes for the title of Best Wall Builder. The wall's transformation into a global icon didn't happen overnight. It took centuries of storytelling, both romantic and factual, to cement its place in the world's imagination. The wall's allure lies in its duality. It's a symbol of both human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of power, a monument to both unity and division. And it's this very paradox that makes it so compelling. Sure, it's a marvel of engineering, but it's also a reminder of the human cost behind its grandeur, a cost that included forced labor, staggering taxes, and the relentless drive of rulers who saw the wall as a means to an end. Now, let's talk about its role as a cultural icon. The wall is like the ultimate celebrity. Everyone wants a piece of it, and its image is plastered on everything from souvenir mugs to blockbuster movie backdrops. It's the stone equivalent of a rock star, drawing millions of fans who come to admire its majesty. But beneath this glamorous facade lies a more complex story, one that speaks to the heart of what it means to be Chinese. The wall embodies resilience, endurance, and the spirit of a people who have weathered millennia of change. In the modern era, the Great Wall has become a bridge connecting China's past with its present. It's a symbol of national pride, a reminder of the country's rich history and cultural heritage. For many Chinese citizens, visiting the wall is a pilgrimage, a chance to connect with their ancestors and the stories that have shaped their nation. It's more than just a tourist attraction. It's a living, breathing testament to the legacy of a civilization that has endured through the ages. Yet, while the wall's symbolic power is undeniable, its practical utility has always been a bit of a mixed bag. Despite its imposing presence, the wall was never an impenetrable barrier. Instead, it served as a strategic tool to delay and deter invaders, buying time for armies to muster and respond. It was less about keeping enemies out and more about controlling the flow of people and goods, an ancient version of border management that's as relevant today as it was in centuries past. And then there's the challenge of preservation. The wall may be a marvel of ancient engineering, but it's also a victim of time and neglect. Erosion, vandalism, and the sheer passage of time have taken their toll on this ancient behemoth. Efforts to preserve and restore the wall are ongoing, but they're not without controversy. Balancing the need for tourism with the imperative to protect this irreplaceable piece of history is a delicate dance, one that requires both money and manpower. It's a testament to the wall's enduring allure that so many are willing to invest in its future, even as the past continues to crumble. In the end, the Great Wall is more than just a divider of lands. It's a bridge to China's cultural past, a link between the ancient and the modern. It's a reminder of the heights of human ambition and the depths of human sacrifice, a symbol of both the power and the fragility of empires. As you stand before its towering stones, it's impossible not to feel the weight of history, the stories etched into every brick and stone. The wall may have been built to keep people apart, but today it stands as a testament to the enduring power of human connection. So, as we conclude this journey through the ages, remember that the Great Wall of China is more than just a series of stones stacked on a hill. It's a monument to the paradoxes of power, a symbol of both division and unity, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for creation and endurance. Whether you see it as a marvel of engineering or a relic of a bygone era, one thing is clear. The Great Wall continues to captivate our imaginations, inviting us to explore the stories it holds and the truths it reveals. And that, my friends, is the true legacy of the Great Wall, a legacy that endures, inspiring us to reach for the stars even as we remain firmly grounded in the lessons of history. In the grand tapestry of history, few figures loom as large and enigmatic as Empress Dowager Cixi, the concubine who climbed the dizzying heights of power in 19th century China. If you ever needed proof that life is stranger than fiction, her story is a prime exhibit, a tale that kicks off in a world where the lines between opulence and absurdity were delightfully blurred. Cixi, born in 1835 as Yehanara Zheng, entered the imperial harem at the tender age of 16. Not as the top pick, mind you, but as a lowly concubine, a mere blip on the emperor's radar. Yet, just like an ancient Cinderella, she had the charm to turn a fleeting favor into a lifetime gig of political cunning. In 1856, when she bore the Xianfeng emperor his only son, she secured her foothold in the court, a court that was less a well-oiled machine and more a tangled mess of intrigue and silk robes. The Forbidden City was the epicenter of this chaos, a place where 999 rooms were filled with as much drama as you'd find in a modern-day soap opera. Forget open-plan offices. The emperor's palace ran on whispers and backdoor dealings, with a hierarchy so complex it made quantum physics look like a children's puzzle. Cixi's ascent wasn't just about navigating these treacherous waters. It was about mastering them like a pro surfer on a tsunami. Life in the Forbidden City was a peculiar mix of strict protocol and outright eccentricity. Emperors were bound by rituals more numerous than their concubines, an average of 3,000, in case you were wondering. Yes, the emperors had more romantic options than Netflix has bad sequels. The palace was a place where bureaucratic meetings could be interrupted by the meowing of the emperor's favorite cats or the arrival of the latest exotic bird, a gift from some far-flung envoy trying to curry favor. But let's not get too distracted by the menagerie. Cixi's rise was no fluke. It was a masterclass in leveraging opportunity. When the Xianfeng emperor died in 1861, leaving behind a 5-year-old heir, Cixi saw her chance. Alongside Empress Dowager Xin, she became regent, steering the ship of state with a firm hand, while managing to keep her own head above the choppy waters of palace politics. Now, let's talk about those quirks. The Forbidden City wasn't just home to the emperor and his court. It was a hub of peculiar protocols. For instance, the emperor's diet was a culinary spectacle involving 120 dishes per meal, yet he might only nibble at a few. Imagine the food waste, and you thought your fridge was bad. Meanwhile, Cixi's own tastes were decidedly more refined. She's reported to have enjoyed Peking duck and had a penchant for lychees, which were delivered fresh from the southern provinces by a relay of fast riders. Today, we call it express delivery. Back then, it was just another Tuesday. Her contemporaries were no less colorful. Prince Gong, a key ally, was known for his sharp wit and political savvy, yet even he couldn't escape the palace's eccentricities. In one instance, Cixi supposedly tricked him into thinking he had to eat a poisoned dumpling as a loyalty test. The dumpling was, of course, harmless, but it's a testament to the lengths of intrigue one might go to in such a setting. Cixi's path wasn't just about strategic marriages or birthing heirs. It was a chess game played on a board where every piece sought to topple the queen. Her power moves were legendary. In an era when women were expected to stay behind the screen, Cixi sat behind it literally, conducting state affairs from behind a yellow silk screen, unseen yet omnipresent, like the Wizard of Oz without the smoke and mirrors. Palace life was a dizzying carousel of etiquette and espionage, where every courtier had an agenda and every concubine a secret. In this high-stakes game, Cixi's initial low rank was a blessing in disguise, allowing her to observe, learn, and strike when the moment was ripe. Her early life was a tapestry of lessons in survival, teaching her the art of patience and the power of silence, skills that would serve her well as she tightened her grip on the dragon throne. So, what's the takeaway here? Cixi wasn't just a footnote in history. She was the author of her destiny, reshaping the course of China's imperial history with a deft touch. Her rise is a testament to the fact that even in a world bound by rigid hierarchies and bizarre traditions, a determined spirit can turn the tables, or in her case, the throne. As we delve deeper into her reign, expect more twists, turns, and perhaps a few more poisoned dumplings. And so, as Cixi tightened her grip on the dragon throne, she wasn't just rearranging the chessboard. She was flipping it over and redefining the game. In the chaotic aftermath of Emperor Zheng Feng's death, she didn't simply emerge from the shadows. She became the shadow that loomed over the Forbidden City, casting its influence far beyond the palace walls. Now, let's rewind to that pivotal moment in 1861. Zheng Feng had shuffled off this mortal coil after a prolonged game of imperial hide-and-seek in a mountain resort, leaving a 5-year-old emperor, a gaggle of concubines, and a power vacuum that could have swallowed the entire Qing dynasty. Enter stage left, Cixi, with her partner in crime, Prince Gong. Together, they were the Barney and Clyde of the Qing court, minus the bank heists, and with a lot more silk. Let's not forget Empress Dowager Xin, Cixi's co-regent. Together, these two women were like the ultimate power couple, ruling from behind the throne with a finesse that made even the most seasoned courtiers tremble. Their partnership was built on necessity and shared goals, not sisterly affection. Think more Cagney and Lacey than Thelma and Louise. The prince, who was Cixi's ally, was no slouch either. Prince Gong was a diplomat and a reformist, and he was savvy enough to recognize the importance of backing the right horse, or in this case, the right Empress Dowager. With his support, Cixi orchestrated a coup that would have made Machiavelli proud. She and Xin pulled off a palace coup so slick, it left the regents appointed by Zheng Feng, known as the 8 regents, spinning like tops. The hapless regents, who had been appointed to guide the young emperor, found themselves ousted faster than you could say imperial decree. This was no small feat. It was a masterstroke that turned the tide of Chinese history. The main event that sealed their fate was the Xinyu coup. It was a political drama worthy of a miniseries, complete with secret meetings, forged edicts, and a daring midnight arrest. The coup unfolded with the precision of a Swiss watch, and by the end of it, Cixi and her allies had not only neutralized the regents, but also cemented their control over the imperial court. Talk about a hostile takeover. But oh, the absurdity of it all. The court politics were a bewildering dance of rituals and red tape. The regents had been outmaneuvered not through brute force, but through the pen, specifically, a series of memorials and edicts that declared their incompetence and treachery. Cixi's strategic genius lay in her ability to use the very institutions meant to constrain her to further her own power. She was like a chess player who used her opponent's pieces to capture the king. From her position behind the silk screen, Cixi was the unseen puppeteer, orchestrating every move with an invisible hand. The court was a powder keg of intrigue, and she had the match. Yet, as ridiculous as these rituals might seem to us today, they were the mechanisms of power in a world where tradition was both a shackle and a shield. The Game of Thrones, King Edition, wasn't just about who sat on the dragon throne. It was about who controlled the narrative. Cixi understood this better than anyone. Her co-regency with Xian was a delicate balance, a power-sharing agreement where both women had to navigate the treacherous waters of court intrigue, all while maintaining a facade of harmony. Their partnership was less about mutual admiration and more about mutual survival. And what of the young emperor, Tangzhai? Well, he was more a pawn than a player in this grand game. His reign was nominal, a mere footnote in the annals of history, overshadowed by the formidable presence of his mother. It was Cixi who wielded the true power, guiding the empire through turbulent times with a steady hand and a strategic mind. Cixi's rule was marked by contradictions. She was both a traditionalist and a reformer, a guardian of the old order who was unafraid to embrace new ideas when it suited her. Her support for the self-strengthening movement, which aimed to modernize China's military and industrial capabilities, was a testament to her pragmatic vision. Yet, she was also a staunch defender of the imperial system, resistant to any changes that threatened her own authority. So, what's the real story behind the legend of Cixi? She was a woman who defied the constraints of her time, a leader who navigated the labyrinthine corridors of power with skill and cunning. Hers was a reign characterized by paradoxes and power plays, a testament to the complexity of human nature and the relentless pursuit of power. As we leave this chapter of Cixi's life, remember that her story is far from over. There are more twists and turns to come, more coups and conspiracies, more triumphs and tragedies. For now, though, let's savor this moment of triumph, this coup de maître that set the stage for the next act in the drama of Cixi's reign. So stay tuned, because the Empress Dowager's story is just heating up, and believe me, you won't want to miss what happens next. As Cixi's story unfolds, we find her poised on the brink of an ambitious chapter, the self-strengthening movement. This initiative was China's attempt to play catch-up with the West, like signing up for an Ironman after years of couch surfing. Picture the Qing dynasty, with its silk robes and tea ceremonies, suddenly determined to master steam engines and ironclads. It was less a seamless transition and more a cultural car crash. But hey, they were trying. The self-strengthening movement was an exercise in modernization that aimed to blend Western technology with traditional Chinese values. Talk about a high-risk recipe, like mixing oil and water and hoping for a gourmet vinaigrette. It kicked off in earnest during the 1860, driven by reform-minded officials who saw the writing on the wall after several humiliating defeats by foreign powers. The Opium Wars had left China licking its wounds, and the Taiping Rebellion had shown just how fragile the empire's grip on power truly was. Now, Cixi wasn't exactly the poster child for radical reform, but she was a pragmatist. She realized that to maintain her power, some concessions to modernity were necessary. After all, you couldn't very well continue to rule an empire if that empire was getting carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey by foreign invaders. So, she threw her weight behind the movement, albeit cautiously, like someone testing the water temperature with their toe before diving in. One of the keystones of this movement was military modernization. And by modernization, I mean trying to build a navy that wouldn't sink at the first sign of a gentle breeze. The Qing court invested in Western shipbuilding techniques, constructing a fleet that was supposed to make even Neptune raise an eyebrow. However, the reality was a bit more unsinkable. Imagine commissioning battleships that couldn't quite decide if they were boats or oversized bathtubs. The Beiyang fleet, as it was known, became infamous for its mixed performance. It was like assembling an orchestra and forgetting to include the conductor. The costs were astronomical. In the 1880, the Chinese government shelled out over 3 million taels of silver. That's north of $100 million today on naval upgrades alone. But money wasn't the only issue. Integrating Western technology into Chinese society was like trying to introduce jazz fusion to a classical music conservatory. There was resistance at every level, from the mandarins who saw foreign technology as a threat to Confucian values, to the artisans who viewed it as a threat to their livelihoods. And if you thought the military upgrades were a comedy of errors, wait until you hear about the industrial ventures. China embarked on a spree of building arsenals and shipyards, adopting Western production methods with all the enthusiasm of a New Year's resolution gone awry. The Jiangnan shipyard in Shanghai was a flagship project, literally and figuratively, but the challenges were immense. Imagine trying to teach an ancient dragon to breathe fire in the modern world. It's not going to happen overnight, and you're bound to get singed in the process. Then there was the issue of education. The King Court realized that to understand and implement Western technology, they needed people who actually understood it. So, they sent students abroad, creating scholarship programs that were the 19th century equivalent of study abroad programs. In 1872, the first group of 30 Chinese students was sent to the United States, a cultural exchange that must have felt like landing on Mars to those young scholars. These students were expected to return with the knowledge needed to help modernize China. Yet, upon their return, many found their Western education more of a liability than an asset in the deeply traditional court. Cixi's balancing act was not for the faint-hearted. She had to placate conservative elements within the court who saw these reforms as a betrayal of Chinese tradition, while simultaneously dealing with the reformists who were growing impatient with the snail's pace of change. It was a tightrope walk of epic proportions, and Cixi was the acrobat without a net. The clash of ancient customs with modern ideas often led to situations that were as absurd as they were tragic. Take, for instance, the infamous attempts to blend Western military drills with traditional Chinese martial arts. Imagine soldiers trying to march in formation while simultaneously performing Tai Chi. It was less a display of military might and more a surreal dance performance. Yet, for all its ludicrous moments, the self-strengthening movement was a crucial period in China's history. It was a time when the ancient empire started to shake off the dust of centuries and look toward a future that was uncertain and terrifying, but also full of potential. The movement was, in many ways, a microcosm of Cixi's own reign, full of contradictions, struggles, and the relentless pursuit of power in a changing world. As the movement gained momentum, Cixi had to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics, where every reform was met with opposition, and every setback was seen as an opportunity by her rivals. It was a game of chess played on a board that was constantly shifting under her feet. And yet, she pressed on, driven by a vision of an empire that could stand toe-to-toe with the Western powers that had once humiliated it. So, what's the takeaway from this chapter of Cixi's reign? She was a leader who understood the importance of adaptation in the face of change. She wasn't a revolutionary, nor was she a reformer in the mold of Western leaders. Instead, she was a pragmatic strategist, willing to embrace new ideas when it suited her needs, but always with an eye on maintaining her own power. Her involvement in the self-strengthening movement was a testament to her ability to blend the old with the new, to walk the fine line between tradition and modernity in a world that was rapidly transforming. As we pause here, remember that Cixi's story is far from over. The self-strengthening movement was just one chapter in her long and complex reign, a reign that would see her face challenges that would have daunted even the most seasoned ruler. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let's leave Cixi in this moment of transition, a moment when the ancient and the modern collided in a spectacular display of ambition and audacity. Stay tuned, because the Empress Dowager's story is only just beginning to unfold, and it promises to be a journey full of surprises and revelations. As the curtains rise on yet another act of Cixi's grand historical drama, we find her embroiled in one of the most chaotic periods of her reign, the Boxer Rebellion. Imagine, if you will, a movement that starts with the fervor of a rock concert, but quickly escalates into the tumult of a full-blown riot. The Boxers, a ragtag group of anti-foreign and anti-Christian zealots, were convinced that their martial arts prowess and magic spells could repel bullets, a belief that was as fantastical as it was fatal. Around the late 1890, China was a simmering cauldron of discontent. Foreign powers were carving the empire into spheres of influence like a Thanksgiving turkey, and the Qing dynasty was struggling to maintain a semblance of sovereignty. Enter the Boxers, with their fists of fury and mystical charms, ready to take on the world, or at least the Western world. And here's where Cixi's story takes another twist. Instead of quelling the uprising, she decided to back the Boxers. Why, you ask? Well, let's just say it was a decision born out of desperation, nationalism, and a dash of what could possibly go wrong. Cixi's strategy was a gamble, akin to betting the farm on a horse that had never finished a race. The Boxers saw themselves as the saviors of China, but their methods were less about salvation and more about smashing anything foreign. Railways, telegraph lines, foreign embassies, nothing was safe from their wrath. They were like the anti-tech crusaders of the 19th century, waging a war against the symbols of Western imperialism, with Cixi cheering them on from the sidelines. Now, let's talk numbers. The Boxer Rebellion officially kicked off in 1899 and reached its peak in 1900. At its height, the movement had thousands of followers, and their attacks prompted an international response. The Eight-Nation Alliance, a coalition of Western powers and Japan, assembled a relief force of over 20,000 troops to rescue their besieged citizens in Beijing. The ensuing conflict was a disaster for the Qing dynasty, culminating in the capture of Beijing in August 1900. Cixi, ever the master of reinvention, fled the capital disguised as a commoner, donning civilian garb that was decidedly less opulent than her usual attire. It must have been quite the spectacle, an Empress Dowager, accustomed to the finest silks and jewels, now riding in an ox cart, fleeing her own capital. Talk about a change of scenery. Yet, despite the ignominy of her flight, Cixi was far from finished. Following the Boxer debacle, the Qing government was slapped with the Boxer Protocol in 1901, a peace treaty that was more a list of demands than a diplomatic accord. The reparations were staggering: 450 million taels of silver, payable over 39 years, plus a few other concessions that essentially put China's sovereignty on the clearance rack. For an already beleaguered empire, this was like running a marathon, only to find a brick wall at the finish line. But here's where Cixi's story takes another unexpected turn. Instead of fading into obscurity, she engineered a political comeback that would make any PR strategist weep with envy. She cleverly distanced herself from the Boxers, painting them as misguided zealots and herself as the wise matriarch who had been led astray by bad advice. It was a political pivot worthy of a trapeze artist, and it worked. In the years following the Boxer Rebellion, Cixi embarked on a series of reforms. Yes, you heard that right, reforms. It was a classic case of if you can't beat them, join them. Realizing that the empire's survival depended on modernization, she launched the late Qing reforms, a last-ditch effort to drag China kicking and screaming into the 20th century. The reforms covered everything from education to military restructuring, aiming to create a constitutional monarchy that, ideally, wouldn't collapse under its own weight. Among these reforms was the modernization of the military, an area where the king had lagged embarrassingly behind. The Beiyang army, once a ragtag collection of troops, was reorganized and trained along Western lines. It was a Herculean task, comparable to teaching an elephant to tap dance, but it marked a significant shift in how the king viewed military power. On the educational front, Cixi supported the establishment of new schools and the abolition of the ancient civil service exam, an exam that had less to do with actual governance and more with rote memorization of Confucian classics. It was a bold move, like swapping a horse-drawn carriage for a Model T, and it signaled a departure from the old ways that had defined the Qing administration for centuries. Yet, amidst all these reforms, myths about Cixi's extravagant lifestyle continued to swirl like so much palace intrigue. One of the most persistent legends involves the infamous marble boat at the Summer Palace, an ostentatious folly that has been painted as a symbol of Cixi's supposed profligacy. The real story: while the boat was indeed commissioned during her reign, it was more a whimsical garden ornament than an actual seaworthy vessel. It's as if Marie Antoinette's Petit Trianon had been built on a lake. The truth is, the marble boat wasn't a testament to Cixi's lavish spending, but rather a reflection of the palace's penchant for aesthetic curiosities. And let's not forget the tales of Cixi's alleged extravagance, a narrative that's as colorful as it is misleading. While she did enjoy the finer things in life, who doesn't? Her spending was often exaggerated by her critics. Yes, she had a taste for Peking duck and fresh lychees, but the idea of her draining the imperial coffers to fund a life of luxury is more fiction than fact. If anything, her spending was strategic, aimed at maintaining the grandeur and prestige of the Qing court in a world that was rapidly evolving. As we draw this chapter to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on the enigma that was Cixi. Her later years were a whirlwind of triumphs and scandals, reforms and rebellions, all set against the backdrop of an empire in decline. She was a woman who defied the constraints of her time, a leader who navigated the labyrinthine corridors of power with a skill that was both remarkable and ruthless. Cixi's legacy is a testament to the complexities of history, a reminder that the past is rarely as simple as it seems. Her story is one of paradoxes and power plays, a narrative that challenges our understanding of leadership and legacy. As we prepare to explore the final act of her reign, remember that her story is far from finished. There are more revelations to come, more myths to debunk, and more lessons to learn from the life of one of history's most intriguing figures. Stay tuned, because the Empress Dowager's tale is about to take another dramatic turn. And so, as Cixi's story reaches its final act, we find ourselves delving into the enigma of her legacy, a patchwork quilt of triumphs and tarnishes, stitched together by history's often fickle needle. Cixi passed away on November 15, 1908, aged 72, just a day after the death of her chosen successor, the Guangxu Emperor. Coincidence? Well, that's one for the conspiracy theorists to debate. For our purposes, it's enough to say that the timing was impeccable, if a bit morbidly theatrical. Now, let's talk about how history has treated Cixi. Her death marked the end of an era, but her story was just beginning to be written by historians, each with a different pen. She was vilified by early 20th century reformists, portrayed as the quintessential villain in the fall of the Qing dynasty. In their eyes, she was the dragon lady who clung to power at the expense of progress, an image as captivating as it was misleading. But wait, let's not dismiss her too quickly. Here's the kicker. Cixi was a woman who played the power game in a world that didn't even let her sit at the table. She wasn't just breaking the glass ceiling. She was doing it in an era when women were expected to stay behind the curtain, literally and figuratively. Her ability to maintain control over the sprawling and often chaotic Qing bureaucracy for nearly half a century is nothing short of remarkable. She was like a political Houdini, escaping the chains of tradition with a flourish. Fast forward to more recent years, and Cixi's legacy gets a makeover worthy of a reality TV transformation. Modern scholars have started to view her as a proto-feminist icon, a woman who wielded power in a male-dominated society with an iron hand wrapped in a silk glove. The pendulum of history has swung from demonization to admiration, highlighting the complexity of her character. Was she a despot clinging to an outdated system, or a savvy ruler navigating a collapsing world? Spoiler alert, she was a bit of both. One of the enduring myths is that Cixi was solely responsible for the Qing dynasty's decline, a narrative that's as simplistic as blaming the Titanic sinking on an unlucky iceberg. The truth, the dynasty was already creaking under its own weight long before Cixi took the reins. The Opium Wars, internal rebellions, and foreign encroachments were like termites gnawing at the empire's foundations. Cixi's reign was less about building an empire and more about keeping the roof from caving in. Let's add some numbers to this narrative. By the time Cixi entered the political arena, China had already endured the costly Opium Wars, 1839-1842, 1856-1860, and the devastating Taiping Rebellion, 1850-1864, which alone resulted in an estimated 20 million deaths. Economically, the Qing dynasty was hemorrhaging money, with silver reserves plummeting and inflation rising faster than Cixi's own ascent to power. The Boxer Rebellion's reparations of 450 million taels of silver were the final nail in a coffin already packed with economic woes. Yet, despite these challenges, Cixi's reign saw attempts at modernization that were groundbreaking for their time. The late Qing reforms, initiated under her watch, laid the groundwork for a constitutional monarchy, an idea that would have seemed as far-fetched in her youth as putting a man on the moon. The abolition of the civil service, exams in 1905, was a seismic shift in a system that had survived for over 1,000 years. It was like deciding to swap out an ancient abacus for a shiny new calculator, and it signaled the twilight of an era steeped in tradition. Cixi's life was a lesson in the art of the possible. She didn't have the luxury of idealism. Her reign was a balancing act between tradition and modernity, self-preservation and statecraft. Her support for the self-strengthening movement, despite its hiccups, showed a willingness to adapt, even if it meant dipping her toes into the unfamiliar waters of Western technology. She was a pragmatist in an age that desperately needed one, steering a ship that was perpetually on the brink of sinking. And here's where the irony of Cixi's legacy truly shines. The very reforms she set in motion, though insufficient to save the Qing dynasty, laid the groundwork for China's eventual transformation into a modern nation-state. Her late-stage push for reform was like trying to catch a train that had already left the station, but it set a precedent for change that would echo into the 20th century and beyond. So, what's the final verdict on Empress Dowager Cixi? She was a ruler who defied the constraints of her time, a woman who wielded power with a deftness that was both admired and feared. Her reign was a paradox of progress and preservation, a testament to the complexities of leadership in a world on the brink of transformation. She remains a figure of fascination, a symbol of female power in an era that had little room for it. As we wrap up this historical journey, let's leave with a few sharp observations. Cixi's story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a canvas painted in shades of grey. Her legacy is a tale of contradictions, a narrative where the lines between hero and villain blur in the dim light of hindsight. In the end, Cixi was neither the savior nor the destroyer of the Qing dynasty. She was, above all, a survivor, a woman who navigated the treacherous waters of imperial politics with intelligence, tenacity, and a touch of theatrical flair. So, the next time you hear tales of the Dragon Lady or read about the last days of imperial China, remember that behind the myths and legends lies a real person with real challenges and real achievements. Cixi's story is one of resilience in the face of adversity, a testament to the power of adaptation in an ever-changing world. And if nothing else, her life is a fascinating reminder that sometimes the most unlikely figures can leave the deepest marks on history. Young Hannibal Barca's life in ancient Carthage was a bit like growing up in a military recruitment poster, only with more elephants and less Photoshop. Born in 247 BCE, in a city known for its maritime power, a knack for annoying Rome, Hannibal was destined for a life of soldiering before he could even spell Carthage. Not that they had spelt check back then. Carthage was the kind of place where military legends weren't just on coin faces. They were at your dinner table, passing the salt and reminding you of Rome's bad manners. Hannibal's dad, Hamilcar Barca, was the Carthaginian equivalent of a rock star general. Picture a man who'd just come off a grueling defeat in the First Punic War, but bounced back to play the greatest hits of Mediterranean conquest. It's said that, before setting off for Spain, Hamilcar made little Hannibal, just 9 years old, swear eternal enmity against Rome. Talk about a dramatic family bonding activity. This story is about as popular as a Roman toga party, but about as historically reliable as a reality TV show. Polybius, our ancient source with a penchant for drama, tells us about this vow, and while it gives us goosebumps, it might also be a pinch of propaganda with a dash of poetic license. Let's not get too bogged down in oaths and olive branches. Hannibal's childhood was filled with the kind of military training that puts modern boot camps to shame. He was surrounded by seasoned soldiers who taught him the art of war like it was the family business, because, well, it was. And among all these lessons, the elephants stood out. Ah, elephants, those colossal, unpredictable, and not so well suited for alpine climate creatures. The Carthaginians had a thing for elephants, and for young Hannibal, they were the ancient equivalent of having a tank, if your tank had a mind of its own and a propensity to panic. Now, to grasp just how seriously Carthage took its military, let's dive into some numbers. In the 3rd century BCE, Carthage had a population of around 400,000, and it wasn't just a city, it was an economic powerhouse. With a navy that boasted at least 200 warships at its peak, Carthage was the kind of city that made Rome break into a sweat. Their economy was fueled by trade across the Mediterranean, and their military ambitions were bankrolled by the profits of commerce and the occasional contribution from conquered territories. You know, the ancient version of economic sanctions, but with more swords and fewer spreadsheets. Hannibal's early life was steeped in the tension between Carthage and Rome. The First Punic War had ended in 241 BCE, and Carthage had been forced to sign a treaty that was about as pleasant as a Roman winter. They lost Sicily, had to pay a war indemnity of 200 talents over 10 years, roughly 80, 9,000 kilograms of silver, and had to deal with the kind of Roman smugness that makes a history buff wince. But young Hannibal wasn't just living in the shadow of past defeats. He was growing up in a world where military innovation was as important as family honor. The Carthaginians were masterful tacticians, and Hannibal absorbed these lessons like a sponge in a rainstorm. He learned that war was not just about numbers, but about strategy, a lesson that would serve him well in his future exploits. As Hannibal grew, so did his fascination with elephants. You have to wonder if he saw them as more than just military assets. Maybe they were a symbol of the audacity and ambition that defined his family's legacy. Elephants were impressive and intimidating, much like the Barkers themselves. But they were also unpredictable, which, as we'll see, was a bit of a family trait too. Let's circle back to that legendary oath. While it's tempting to imagine a young Hannibal promising eternal revenge against Rome with a dramatic flourish, the reality might have been more mundane. Perhaps it was less about hatred and more about a pragmatic understanding of the geopolitical chessboard. Carthage was a city that thrived on competition, and Rome was the biggest competitor in the Mediterranean sandbox. Hannibal's upbringing was a crash course in both the glory and the grit of military life. He learned that war was not just about the clash of swords, but the clash of wills. He saw the scars of his father's campaigns, and understood that leadership required not just courage, but cunning. And as he watched the Carthaginian army maneuver, he developed a keen eye for strategy, a skill that would later have Roman generals waking up in cold sweats. So, what does Hannibal's early life tell us about the man he would become? For one, it reveals a boy who was molded by the pressures of history and the expectations of his bloodline. Hannibal wasn't just a product of his time. He was a prodigy shaped by it. His story was already being written long before he crossed the Alps with elephants in tow, and it was a tale laden with ambition and audacity. As we close this chapter on young Hannibal, let's remember that history often paints its heroes with broad strokes, but it's the details, the small, seemingly insignificant moments, that truly sculpt their destinies. Hannibal's early years were a blend of myth and reality, of familial pressure and personal passion, setting the stage for a legacy that would echo through the ages. And while his elephants are a memorable part of his story, it's his strategic genius that truly stands the test of time. Stay tuned, because this saga is just getting started. And so, as Hannibal stood on the brink of his legendary campaign, the boy forged in Carthaginian fire was ready to face the frosty Alps head-on. By the time he took command of the Carthaginian forces in 221 BCE, Hannibal was chomping at the bit to make his mark on history. His audacious plan, to invade Italy and give Rome the kind of surprise party that would leave their senatorial togas in a twist. Now, let's talk about that plan for a second. Cross the Alps with an army. Brilliant. Bring elephants along for the ride. Genius or madness, depending on your perspective. But Hannibal was nothing if not ambitious, and he was about to take over the top to new heights, literally. Picture it. A 29-year-old commander leading an army of around 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and wait for it, 37 elephants. That's right, 37 of these colossal creatures were set to trek through the kind of terrain that even mountain goats would give a hard pass. Why the Alps, you ask? Well, Hannibal knew the Romans would expect an attack from the sea. He wanted to hit them where they least expected it, like a punchline you never see coming. The Alps weren't just a geographical barrier, they were a psychological one. Crossing them would be like winning the ancient world's version of America's Got Talent, proving Carthage had the chops to outmaneuver the Romans even on their own turf. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was a logistical nightmare that could give even the most seasoned quartermaster a migraine. Imagine managing an army through steep, icy passes with limited supplies, not to mention the constant threat of ambush by hostile tribes. It was like trying to organize a rock concert in a snowstorm, with elephants as your headline act. Hannibal had to be a master of logistics, ensuring food, water, and morale were maintained under conditions that would make even the hardiest soldier question his life choices. The journey through the Alps took around 16 grueling days. During this time, Hannibal's forces faced everything from landslides to treacherous weather to, yes, warriors from local tribes who weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. These hostile folks had no intention of letting an army just waltz through their backyard, and they put up a fight that would have made any Carthaginian soldier remember the Mediterranean sun with fond nostalgia. As for the elephants, their role was as much psychological as it was practical. They were the ancient equivalent of tanks, designed to intimidate and break enemy lines. But let's get real. Elephants aren't exactly built for mountain climbing. By the time Hannibal's forces descended into Italy, only a handful of the original 37 had survived. Most historians agree on a mere dozen. The rest succumbed to the brutal conditions, proving that even the mighty pachyderms had their limits. Still, the sight of these surviving giants would have been enough to send a shiver down the spine of any Roman soldier who'd never seen an elephant, let alone one charging at them. This was more than just a military maneuver. It was a statement. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps was an audacious feat that would echo through history, a testament to his strategic genius and sheer audacity. It showed that he wasn't just playing the same old game as Rome. He was rewriting the rules. The crossing was a bold gamble that paid off in positioning his army in the Italian heartland before the Romans had even finished their morning porridge. But let's not get swept away by the romance of it all. The reality was gritty and grim. Hannibal's men faced starvation, frostbite, and the constant threat of attack. The march cost him nearly half of his army, a staggering toll that would have made a lesser commander reconsider his career choices. Yet, despite these setbacks, Hannibal emerged from the mountains ready to take on Rome with the kind of determination that could set a stone ablaze. This journey wasn't just about the physical crossing. It was about the psychological warfare that Hannibal waged on the Roman psyche. His presence in Italy was a constant reminder that Rome, for all its power, was not invincible. It was a wake-up call to the Roman Republic that their dominance could be challenged in the most unexpected ways. As Hannibal set foot in Italy, he wasn't just crossing a mountain range. He was crossing into the annals of history, transforming from the son of a general into a legend in his own right. The Alps were just a prelude to the symphony of strategy and battle that he would conduct across the Italian peninsula. And while the elephants might have been fewer in number, their symbolic weight, an embodiment of Hannibal's strategic audacity, would linger long after the snow had melted. So, there you have it. Hannibal Barca, the man who took on nature and won, albeit at a heavy cost. The crossing of the Alps was a defining moment, a masterstroke of military strategy that set the stage for the battles to come. It was a gamble that paid off not just in tactical advantage, but in the indelible mark it left on history. As we leave Hannibal on the brink of his Italian campaign, let's remember that the journey over those ice-capped peaks was just the beginning of a saga that would see him become one of the most formidable foes Rome ever faced. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in Hannibal's story is where the real action begins. So, as Hannibal stood ready to unleash his strategic symphony across Italy, we find him on the cusp of what would be his magnum opus, the Battle of Cannae. This wasn't just any skirmish. It was the kind of battle that would make military historians want to write sonnets. Picture this: August 2, 216 BCE, hot enough to melt a Roman in his sandals, near the dusty fields of Cannae in southeastern Italy. Here, Hannibal faced a Roman army of roughly 86,000 troops, a veritable tidal wave of disciplined, heavily armored soldiers ready to wipe the Carthaginians off the map. But Hannibal, ever the master of turning the tables, had something far more devious in mind, a tactical blueprint that would become the gold standard for military brilliance. Now, let's set the scene. Hannibal had at his disposal a force of about 50,000 men, Carthaginians, allied Gauls, and a smattering of other mercenaries who were probably as eager for Roman blood as they were for their next paycheck. Outnumbered almost 2-1, Hannibal knew he couldn't just march in with his army and hope for the best. Instead, he decided to play a little game of tactical Jenga with the Romans, stacking the odds in his favor with a strategy so daring it might as well have been called Operation. Watch this. The Carthaginian forces formed a convex crescent, with Hannibal placing his most vulnerable troops, the Gauls, right in the center, ensuring they'd be the first to engage the Romans. To the Romans, it must have looked like the Carthaginians were setting themselves up for a good old-fashioned walloping. with confidence bordering on hubris. The Roman legions charged straight at the center, thinking they were about to crush Hannibal's forces like a grape underfoot. But as the Roman troops pushed forward, Hannibal's crescent bent backward, transforming from a bulging center into a well-timed trap. This was classic Hannibal, using the Romans' own momentum against them, like a seasoned matador sidestepping a charging bull. As the Romans pressed deeper, the Carthaginian flanks, composed of Hannibal's more seasoned African troops, curved around the Roman sides, enveloping them with the precision of a tailor wrapping a toga. Meanwhile, Hannibal's cavalry, under the command of the adept General Hannibal, swept around to attack the Roman cavalry, sending them fleeing and leaving the Roman infantry trapped in the center. It was like watching a boa constrictor slowly tighten around its prey, with the Romans caught in a deadly embrace they couldn't escape. The result? A staggering Roman defeat. Estimates suggest around 50, 000 to 70, 000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day, which, if you're keeping score at home, is one of the bloodiest days in military history. The Roman cavalry suffered nearly 6,000 losses, while Hannibal's own casualties were around 6,000, a brutally efficient exchange rate. In the aftermath, the Roman Republic was left reeling, licking its wounds and trying to figure out how a guy with fewer resources and an army of mercenaries had just handed them their proverbial toga. But let's not just marvel at the tactical genius without asking why it mattered. Cannae wasn't just a military victory, it was a psychological earthquake. Hannibal had shown Rome that its legions could be defeated, its generals outsmarted, and its citizens made to question the invincibility of their republic. The economic stakes were equally high. Rome's military was a significant part of its economic engine, and losing that many soldiers and resources was like watching your stock portfolio go up in smoke. The cost of war had just hit Rome's treasury like a ton of amphorae, and the political ramifications were seismic. Yet, despite this triumphant display of strategic brilliance, Hannibal never managed to deliver the knockout blow to Rome. Why, you ask? Therein lies one of history's great conundrums. See, Hannibal had mastered the art of the battle, but the war was a different beast altogether. Rome, though bruised, was far from broken. The Senate, in a move that would have made a Hollywood screenwriter proud, refused to negotiate peace. They doubled down, raised new armies, and adopted a strategy of attrition, refusing to meet Hannibal in open battle again, opting instead to harass and contain him. Hannibal's situation was further hamstrung by a lack of support from Carthage itself. The Carthaginian government, apparently not as keen on funding an extended Italian vacation as Hannibal might have hoped, was reluctant to send reinforcements or additional supplies. Meanwhile, Rome had the advantage of being able to draw on the vast resources of its allies throughout Italy, slowly rebuilding its strength and fortifying its resolve. It's like Hannibal was playing chess on a board where the Romans had more pieces and a few spare sets in the drawer. Economically, this war of attrition was a slow bleed for Carthage. Without consistent resupply or reinforcement, Hannibal's forces were like a smartphone without a charger, impressive, but eventually going to run out of juice. Politically, Hannibal's inability to sway key Italian allies to his side meant he was constantly fighting an uphill battle, both literally and figuratively. The Romans, on the other hand, leveraged their political networks like the world's most determined LinkedIn users, ensuring they always had alliances and resources to back them up. While the Battle of Cannae remains a textbook example of tactical genius, studied by military academies around the globe, it also serves as a poignant reminder that winning battles isn't the same as winning wars. Hannibal's victory was a masterpiece, but without the resources or support to capitalize on it, it was a masterpiece framed in frustration. His campaigns in Italy would continue for years, but without the decisive support needed to siege Rome itself. He was like a master chef without a kitchen, forced to make do with what he had. As we leave Hannibal in the aftermath of Cannae, a victor yet not victorious, we see a man whose ambitions were as vast as the Mediterranean, but whose means were limited by the realities of politics and logistics. Hannibal might have been the greatest general Rome ever faced, but even the greatest need a little help from their friends, or in this case, their home government. Stay tuned as we explore how this military maestro continued to dance around the Romans, keeping them on their toes, even as the sands of strategic advantage began to shift beneath his feet. But as the Romans regrouped and Hannibal's momentum began to wane, the stage was set for the most unexpected plot twist since the invention of the Trojan horse. Enter Scipio Africanus, the Roman general whose name sounds like it should be on a sword and sandal movie poster. Unlike his predecessors, Scipio was a man with a plan, a strategy that would eventually outfox even Hannibal himself. But let's not skip ahead too fast. After all, the fall of a legend deserves more than just a hasty summary. Picture Rome in the aftermath of Cannae, battered, bruised, but not beaten. The Senate, channeling their inner motivational speaker, decided that surrender was simply not in their vocabulary. Instead, they pulled a classic Roman move. When in doubt, raise more legions. They also adopted a strategy of attrition and guerrilla tactics, refusing to engage Hannibal directly, like a boxer who avoids direct blows while waiting for their opponent to tire. This was the smart tortoise to Hannibal's hare, and slowly it began to pay off. Now, while all this Roman resolve was simmering, Hannibal found himself stuck in a geopolitical quagmire. Carthage, perhaps too busy counting its silver or distracted by other Mediterranean dramas, failed to send the reinforcements Hannibal desperately needed. This economic stinginess was akin to trying to win a Formula One race with a bicycle budget. Carthage's treasury was running on fumes, and the endless warfare was like a leech on their finances. Without the motherland's full support, Hannibal was left in Italy, holding the bag, and it wasn't full of gold. Meanwhile, Scipio Africanus was cooking up a strategy worthy of any reality TV twist. In 210 BCE, the young general was given command in Spain, where he decided to hit Carthage in its wallet. By capturing the key city of New Carthage, modern-day Cartagena, Scipio cut off one of Carthage's vital supply lines, like yanking the plug on Hannibal's life support. This was a crucial move not just militarily, but economically, as it squeezed Carthage's purse strings tighter than a miser's fist. Scipio's approach was more than just a military maneuver. It was a masterclass in strategic patience. He was like the chess player who sacrifices a few pawns knowing the end game would be his. But instead of pawns, Scipio was sacrificing Roman pride, letting Hannibal stew in Italy while he chipped away at Carthage's overseas holdings. His strategy was clear: bleed Carthage dry, then strike at its heart. It was a move that would eventually force Hannibal to abandon his Italian campaign and return to defend his homeland. Back in Italy, Hannibal was becoming the ancient world's most infamous squatter. His presence was a constant thorn in Rome's side, but without new resources or reinforcements, he was like a lion without its roar. Despite his tactical brilliance, Hannibal couldn't break Rome's spirit or its allies' loyalty. The Romans, ever the resourceful strategists, were content to play the long game, waiting for Hannibal to exhaust his resources, both human and material. And then, as if the guards of irony were writing the script, the very strategy that had once made Hannibal a legend was now being used against him. Scipio's tactics mirrored Hannibal's own playbook, adapting and evolving it to fit Rome's grand strategy. By 204 BCE, Scipio had shifted the theater of war to North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home. This was a clever move that put Carthage on the defensive, turning the tables on Hannibal, who had once been the master of offensive warfare. The financial strain on Carthage was immense, like trying to fight a war with one hand tied behind your back, while the other is busy counting coins. The endless campaigns drained the Carthaginian coffers, and the lack of support for Hannibal was like a death sentence for his aspirations in Italy. Back home, the political landscape was a mess, with factions bickering like seagulls over a discarded sandwich, leaving Hannibal with little more than symbolic support. By the time Hannibal and Scipio finally faced off at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, the tables had decisively turned. Scipio had learned well from Hannibal's exploits, using his own tactics against him with a twist. The Romans had finally adapted, and their legions, now seasoned and resolute, matched Hannibal's forces toe-to-toe. The battle was a clash of titans, the culmination of years of warfare and strategic maneuvering. Zama was the final act in this Mediterranean drama, a battle that saw Hannibal's forces outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. The Romans, with their superior cavalry and Scipio's astute strategy, managed to break through Hannibal's lines, sending his troops into disarray. The result was a decisive Roman victory, and with it, the end of Hannibal's dreams of conquering Rome. It was as if the final curtain had fallen on a Shakespearean tragedy, with Hannibal playing the tragic hero whose ambition outstripped his resources. Let's not forget the economic backdrop to this grand finale. The Roman economy, though strained, had managed to withstand Hannibal's onslaught, thanks to their vast network of allies and relentless taxation. In contrast, Carthage's failure to support Hannibal financially was like trying to sail a ship without a sail. The endless warfare had reduced Carthage's coffers to a shadow of their former glory, leaving them unable to support Hannibal's grand designs. And so, Hannibal Barca, the man who had once made Rome tremble, was now a pawn in the larger geopolitical chess game. His brilliance on the battlefield was undeniable, but the lack of support from Carthage and the relentless Roman adaptation turned the tide against him. His defeat at Zama wasn't just a military loss. It was the culmination of a strategic siege that had been years in the making. As we leave Hannibal at this crossroads, we see a man who was both a victim of his own legend and the harsh realities of geopolitics. His story is a testament to the complexity of war and the fickle nature of fortune. While his strategic genius remains undisputed, the realities of economics and politics were forces even Hannibal couldn't outmaneuver. In the end, Hannibal's story is a poignant reminder that in the grand theater of history, even the greatest generals need more than just skill and ambition. They need the full backing of their nation and the winds of fortune at their sails. Stay tuned, because the saga of Hannibal is far from over, and the next chapter will reveal how this once great general navigated the shifting tides of fate and fortune in his later years. And here we are, folks, at the unwinding of Hannibal's narrative tapestry, a story that unspools beyond the battlefield into the murky waters of politics and exile. Picture a man who had once been Carthage's golden boy, now facing the harsh reality of post-war life. After his defeat at Zama in 202 BCE, Hannibal returned to Carthage, but not as the conquering hero. Instead, he was more like an awkward dinner guest who brought the wrong kind of wine. Carthage, crippled by war indemnities and public debt, was forced to sign a peace treaty with Rome that stripped it of its fleet, demanded 10,000 talents, about 260,000 kilograms of silver, and put an end to its status as a major power. Talk about a Roman hangover, but Hannibal wasn't just going to fade into obscurity. No, the man had a penchant for reinvention. Back in Carthage, Hannibal took on the role of a statesman, because when you're not waging war, why not dabble in politics? He was elected as a suffete, a kind of magistrate, and got busy reforming Carthage's administration. Hannibal slashed corruption like a hot knife through butter, implementing policies that reduced the power of the oligarchs and relieved the city's crippling public debt. His reforms were as popular with the common folk as a free amphora of wine, but they were less endearing to the Carthaginian elite. You could say he ruffled feathers, and not in a charming, pillow fight kind of way. This political success, however, was a double-edged sword. Rome, ever the vigilant hawk, was watching Hannibal's every move, and they weren't exactly thrilled to see their old adversary playing the political savior. Rome's senatorial class, the ancient world's equivalent of a paranoid bunch of conspiracy theorists, suspected that Hannibal might be plotting a comeback. The Romans lodged complaints, and Hannibal, sensing the political winds shifting against him like a sailor in a storm, decided it was time to hit the road. In 195 BCE, he fled into exile, evading Roman agents like an ancient James Bond with fewer gadgets, but just as much cunning. The next chapter of Hannibal's life reads like a travelogue of someone with commitment issues. He hopped from one foreign court to another, each time trying to find a new ally, or at least a decent place to stay. First stop, the court of Antiochus Roman III of the Seleucid Empire. Here, Hannibal tried to stir up a little anti-Roman sentiment, advising Antiochus on how to take down their common foe. But Antiochus, perhaps not fully appreciating the strategic mind he just acquired, didn't capitalize on Hannibal's genius. When the Seleucids eventually faced Rome in 190 BCE at the Battle of Magnesia, they were soundly defeated, and Hannibal found himself once again on the move. Ever the nomad, Hannibal made his way to the court of King Prusia's Eye of Bithynia. By this point, his life was more of a strategic retreat than an offensive campaign. He was a man out of options, reduced to the kind of wandering that makes even the most seasoned travelers weary. Rome, relentless as ever, demanded his extradition, like a dog with a bone it just couldn't drop. Prusias, eager to keep the Romans off his back, agreed to hand Hannibal over. And here comes the tragic, yet fitting, end to Hannibal's saga. In 183 BCE, cornered and betrayed, Hannibal chose to end his own life, reportedly with poison. His last words, as recorded by history, were a bitter acknowledgment of fate. Let us now relieve the Romans of their fears by the death of a feeble old man. While Hannibal's life may have ended in exile, his legacy was just getting started. His military tactics, particularly the daring maneuvers at Cannae, became the gold standard for generals of the future. Everyone from Napoleon to Patton studied his strategies, trying to emulate the brilliance that had once brought Rome to its knees. Yet, history is nothing if not a master of irony. Hannibal, the man who'd been the fiercest opponent of Rome, was now a subject of admiration in the very empire he tried to destroy. And let's not forget the economic undercurrents that shaped this epic tale. Carthage's failure to support Hannibal wasn't just a military blunder. It was an economic miscalculation of epic proportions. The war drained Carthage's resources like a leaky amphora, and without the financial backing needed to sustain prolonged campaigns, Hannibal's ambitions were doomed. His story is a sobering reminder that no matter how brilliant a general may be, without the economic and political support of their state, even the mightiest can falter. So, what do we take away from Hannibal's life? For one, it's a lesson in the complex interplay of ambition, fate, and fortune. Hannibal's audacity and strategic genius were unmatched, but he was also a victim of circumstances beyond his control. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of military innovation and the cruel realities of geopolitics. He was a hero in a world that revered military prowess, yet his downfall illustrates the harsh truth that even the greatest leaders need more than just their own will to succeed. They need the unwavering support of their nation, and sometimes a touch of luck. Hannibal Barca, a name that once struck fear into the heart of Rome, has become synonymous with the indomitable spirit of a warrior who dared to dream big even when the odds were stacked against him. He was the tragic hero of his own epic, a man whose life was as much a lesson in human ambition as it was a tale of military brilliance. In the grand tapestry of history, Hannibal's story is a vibrant thread, woven with daring and determination, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire and caution in equal measure. So, as we close the book on Hannibal's life, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the man who challenged the mightiest empire of his age, and whose story reminds us that history is as much about those who dared greatly as it is about those who won. In the bustling tapestry of the late 14th century, a young boy named Mahi found himself swept into the roaring currents of history. Born in 1371 in the Yunnan province, Mahi had little inkling that his life would be anything but ordinary. But as fate would have it, the universe had other plans, and those plans involved a hefty dose of drama. You see, Mahi was captured by the Ming forces when he was just a sprightly 11-year-old, during their campaign against the remnants of the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty. Now, if you're thinking, what a rough way to start one's biography, you're not wrong. But hold on to your hats, because it gets even juicier. This wasn't just any capture. Young Mahi was castrated, a brutal, yet not uncommon fate for captured young boys destined for the imperial service. In a move that would make any soap opera proud, Mahi became a eunuch in the Ming court. And as if life hadn't thrown enough curveballs his way, he was soon on an upward trajectory that would make even Wall Street brokers jealous. Now, let's pause for a moment to appreciate the absurdity. A kid from Yunnan, captured, castrated, and suddenly catapulted into the dizzying heights of the imperial court. Yes, history really can be stranger than fiction. Mahi, however, wasn't just along for the ride. He was sharp, charismatic, and had more street smarts than a seasoned New York cabbie. He quickly caught the eye of the Yongle emperor, Zhu Dai, an emperor with a penchant for grandiose projects and a desire to make a splash on the world stage. Under Zhu Dai's ambitious reign, the Ming dynasty wasn't just about keeping the peace at home. It was about projecting Chinese power across the seas, establishing the Middle Kingdom as the center of the universe. Talk about ambition. In this political climate, where the mantra seemed to be go big or go home, Ma found a unique niche. Rechristened Zheng, he became a trusted advisor, and eventually the Grand Admiral of the Emperor's enormous fleet. Yes, you heard that right. From captured boy to Grand Admiral, Zheng was living proof that life sometimes takes you on the wildest rides. The Ming Dynasty's naval expeditions were no small potatoes. We're talking about fleets comprising hundreds of ships, with the largest, the treasure ships, measuring up to 400 feet long. For perspective, that's longer than a football field, and these behemoths carried everything from silk and porcelain to, quite possibly, some of the Emperor's own overblown expectations. Now, the myth-busting part. Zheng is often romanticized as the benevolent explorer, the Chinese version of Columbus minus the colonial baggage. But let's not kid ourselves. His voyages had a clear agenda: to flex Ming muscle, establish tributary relationships, and ensure everyone knew who the new sheriff in town was. Sure, there were gifts and diplomacy, but there was also a fair share of saber-rattling. After all, nothing says "I come in peace" like showing up with a fleet of giant ships bristling with soldiers. Yet, Zheng position was uniquely paradoxical. On one hand, he was an outsider, a Muslim eunuch in a predominantly Confucian Han-Chinese power structure. On the other, he was the Emperor's right-hand man, entrusted with one of the most grandiose projects of the era. It's the kind of plot twist that makes you wonder if Shakespeare had a time machine. Zheng life at court was a testament to the chaotic, often contradictory nature of power. He was both indispensable and disposable, celebrated yet circumspect. The Ming political climate was a swirling maelstrom of intrigue, ambition, and the occasional backstabbing. The Yongle Emperor, ever the showman, was determined to leave his mark on history, and not just any mark, but one visible from the farthest reaches of the known world. Zheng was his ace in the hole, the captain of his dreams. For Zheng each voyage was a delicate dance of diplomacy and display, a chance to showcase both the splendor and the subtle menace of the Ming dynasty. It was a job that required a deft touch and a charismatic presence, qualities that Zheng had in spades. As Zheng prepared to set sail on his first voyage in 1405, the enormity of his task was clear. He was to command a fleet of over 300 ships and 27,000 men, a floating city set to traverse the Indian Ocean, visiting places as far-flung as Southeast Asia, India, and the Swahili coast of Africa. It was an undertaking that would take years and span thousands of nautical miles. The sheer scale of it was enough to make anyone's head spin, and probably did, for many a hapless bureaucrat tasked with inventorying all the silk and spices. But for Zheng this was more than just a maritime escapade. It was a chance to carve his name into the annals of history, to be remembered as the admiral who sailed the world and brought back its wonders. And who could blame him? After all, if you've been through what he had, captured, castrated, and catapulted to power, you might also be inclined to leave a lasting legacy. In the end, Zheng story is one of resilience, ambition, and the sheer unpredictability of history. It's a reminder that sometimes the road from Yunnan to the Emperor's court is paved with strange and unexpected turns. And for Zheng each turn was another step in a life that defied convention and captured the imagination of generations to come. And so, with the wind in his sails and destiny pointing like a compass needle, Zheng embarked on his maiden voyage in 1405. An undertaking so vast would make even the most seasoned of Viking raiders weep with envy. This wasn't just a flotilla. It was practically a floating metropolis, a veritable armada of 317 ships carrying 28,000 men. To put that in perspective, that's more people than the modern-day population of Monaco, and definitely more than enough to fill every seat at a minor league baseball game. But this was no leisurely cruise. It was a logistical challenge of epic proportions, akin to organizing a modern-day music festival at sea, complete with its own set of challenges, from onboard rations to pirates lurking in the shadows. The Ming dynasty wasn't skimping on this enterprise. The fleet's construction consumed resources that could bankrupt a modest kingdom, with treasure ships alone costing a small fortune. Each of these behemoths was up to 400 feet long, carrying everything from silk to spices, and probably a few of the Emperor's grandiose dreams along for the ride. If you think your last move was complicated, try coordinating a fleet that stretched as far as the eye could see, where every ship had to be perfectly provisioned and synchronized. The cost, enough to keep a small country in luxury for a year. But for the Yongle Emperor, it wasn't just about the money. It was about making a statement, a colossal, seafaring flex of imperial muscle. And speaking of statements, the goals of this expedition were as multifaceted as Zheng's career. Officially, it was about diplomacy and trade, a maritime roadshow designed to showcase the wealth and power of the Ming dynasty. But let's not sugarcoat it. There was a hefty dose of intimidation mixed in. This wasn't just a friendly visit to exchange pleasantries and porcelain. The emperor wanted to remind everyone from Malacca to Mogadishu just who was the new boss of the Indian Ocean. It was like showing up to a backyard barbecue with a tank. You're there to make friends, sure, but everyone knows you mean business. Navigating the high seas in the 15th century was no walk in the park. Zheng and his crew faced a litany of unexpected challenges that would have left even the most seasoned mariners scratching their heads. Take the weather, for instance. The Indian Ocean isn't exactly known for its calm demeanor, and the fleet often found itself at the mercy of storms that could rival the plot twists in a daytime soap opera. Imagine trying to keep hundreds of ships on course while the heavens open up with all the subtlety of a toddler having a tantrum. It required a level of improvisation that would make a jazz musician proud. Then there were the pirates. Forget the romanticized image of swashbuckling adventurers with hearts of gold. The real deal was far more cutthroat, with marauders eager to relieve Zheng's fleet of its precious cargo. The crew had to be on constant alert, ready to fend off these unwelcome guests with a combination of superior firepower and tactical news. It was a game of cat and mouse, with the stakes as high as the Emperor's blood pressure. But let's not forget the men who made this voyage possible. The 28,000 crew members came from all corners of the Empire, a melting pot of cultures and languages thrown together in the name of exploration. They were carpenters, cooks, navigators, and soldiers, each with a role to play in the grand tapestry of Zheng's vision. The logistics of feeding and housing such a crowd was staggering, involving enough rice to fill an Olympic-sized pool and enough fresh water to keep everyone hydrated, and not just from drinking tea. It was a testament to human ingenuity and organization, or at least a testament to everyone's ability to follow orders under duress. Despite the challenges, the fleet's arrival in each port was a spectacle of pomp and ceremony. Imagine pulling in with ships so vast they seemed to swallow the horizon, bearing gifts that dazzled the local rulers and left lasting impressions. The treasures included silk, porcelain, and even exotic animals like giraffes, which must have been quite the conversation starter. In return, Zheng collected tributes and curiosities to take back to the emperor, creating a two-way street of cultural exchange and political maneuvering. It was diplomacy at its finest, a delicate dance that required not just military might, but also the ability to charm and negotiate. Of course, not every encounter went smoothly. On occasion, Zheng had to employ some good old-fashioned persuasion to get his point across. One such instance involved a ruler who refused to acknowledge the Ming Emperor's supremacy. A quick display of naval firepower and a few well-placed diplomatic overtures soon changed his tune. A classic case of speaking softly and carrying a big stick, or in this case, a big fleet. But let's not get carried away with the romantic notion of Zheng, he as a benevolent explorer, spreading good vibes across the seas. While his voyages did foster trade and diplomacy, they were also about securing Chinese dominance and expanding the emperor's influence. It was a balancing act between carrot and stick, with Zheng as the master of ceremonies, orchestrating a spectacle that was as much about projection of power as it was about peaceful exchange. As the first voyage drew to a close, Zheng's reputation as a formidable admiral was cemented. He returned to China with tales of distant lands and exotic treasures, a hero's welcome awaiting him on the shores of the Middle Kingdom. But his journey was far from over. There were more voyages to come, each more ambitious than the last, as the Ming dynasty continued its quest for maritime supremacy. The legacy of Zheng's first expedition laid the groundwork for a new era of exploration, a testament to human ambition and the enduring allure of the unknown. In the end, Zheng's story is one of contradictions. a eunuch who commanded the mightiest fleet on earth, a diplomat with a knack for intimidation, a man of humble origins who rose to the pinnacle of power. His first voyage was but the opening chapter in a saga that would span decades and oceans, a story that continues to captivate and inspire, a reminder of the indomitable spirit of exploration that resides in us all. But remember, dear listener, this is just the beginning. There are more tales to be told, more myths to bust, and more history to uncover as we chart the course of Zheng's incredible journey. So stay tuned, because the adventure is far from over. As Zheng stood on the deck of his flagship, the salty breeze carrying the scent of adventure, he probably wasn't contemplating the fact that his voyages would one day be the stuff of legends. But legend they became, and not just because of the spectacle of it all, though let's be honest, the spectacle was awe-inspiring. Picture this, a fleet so vast it could blot out the sun, setting sail not once, not twice, but 7 times over the course of nearly 3 decades. This was no weekend jaunt. It was a grand tour de force that would make even the most seasoned globetrotter envious. Now, before we get swept away by the grandeur, let's ground ourselves in some hard numbers. Zheng's fleet was a marvel of Ming engineering, with some voyages boasting upwards of 300 ships and 30,000 men. That's like the population of a small town, all packed under wooden behemoths, sailing off into the unknown. It's a miracle that they didn't all end up floundering like a bad reality TV show about survival on a deserted island. These voyages weren't just about waving the Ming flag in distant lands. They were about establishing dominance, both politically and economically. The distances covered were staggering. Zheng's fleet reached the Swahili coast, a whopping 7,000 miles from the shores of China. Sure, today you could just book a flight and be there in less than a day. But back then, it was like planning a mission to Mars. And speaking of Mars, the sight of Chinese ships arriving must have seemed otherworldly to the locals. But let's talk about the Giraffes, because nothing says international diplomacy quite like a long-necked, spotted creature from Africa. Zheng's crew managed to procure these exotic animals and bring them back to China, where they were presented as gifts to the emperor. The giraffes were interpreted as Qilin, mythical creatures symbolizing peace and prosperity. However, the real miracle was not that they were seen as auspicious omens, but that they survived the journey at all. I can only imagine the logistical headache of keeping a giraffe alive and well on a 15th century ship. We're talking about a floating zoo with no user manual, only a wing and a prayer. While the giraffes were the showstoppers, the reality of these voyages was less glamorous. The crew faced constant challenges, from the threat of piracy to the more insidious danger of disease. Life at sea was no picnic. It was a grueling test of endurance. Scurvy nipped at the heels of the sailors like an overzealous terrier, and outbreaks of more serious diseases were not uncommon. The Ming fleet's medical staff worked tirelessly to keep mortality rates in check, but despite their best efforts, many lives were lost. It was a stark reminder that even the mightiest armada was not invincible. Feeding this army of sailors was another Herculean task. Imagine trying to provision enough food and water for thousands of men for months on end. The fleet carried vast stores of rice, dried fish, and pickled vegetables, but the sheer volume required was mind-boggling. It was a logistical nightmare, akin to trying to cater a royal banquet in the middle of a desert. And let's not forget the need for fresh water. Without it, no amount of pickled cabbage would keep scurvy at bay. Despite these hardships, the voyages were a triumph of human ingenuity and determination. Zheng and his crew navigated the treacherous waters of the Indian Ocean, establishing trade routes and forging diplomatic ties. They visited ports across Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and the Arabian Peninsula, exchanging goods and culture. These interactions laid the groundwork for a global network of commerce long before the term globalization was coined. Yet, for all their achievements, the voyages were not without controversy. Critics at home questioned the cost and purpose of such grandiose undertakings. The Ming treasury was not a bottomless pit, and the expense of these expeditions was astronomical. Some historians argue that resources might have been better spent on domestic projects rather than on maritime adventures. But then again, hindsight is a luxury afforded to those who weren't trying to maintain an empire's prestige on the world stage. Zheng's voyages were as much about flexing imperial muscles as they were about fostering peaceful exchange. The mingling of cultures, languages, and ideas was a byproduct of these expeditions. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking that it was all peace and love. The Ming fleet came armed to the teeth, ready to assert its dominance if diplomacy failed. It was a delicate balance between the carrot of trade and the stick of military might. As we peel back the layers of romanticism that have enshrouded Zheng He's legacy, we're left with a portrait of a man and his mission that is as complex as it is captivating. A eunuch who rose to command the greatest fleet the world had ever seen. A diplomat who wielded both charm and intimidation with equal aplomb. Zheng He was a figure of contradictions. His voyages were a testament to the indomitable spirit of exploration, but they were also a reminder of the harsh realities that underpin human ambition. So, as we close this chapter on Zheng He's subsequent voyages, let's remember that the story doesn't end here. There are more tales to be told, more seas to traverse, and more myths to debunk. Zheng He's legacy is one of exploration and exploitation, a dance of diplomacy and dominance. It's a saga that continues to resonate, challenging us to look beyond the myths and see the man behind the legend. Stay tuned for more adventures on the high seas, where history and humanity collide in spectacular fashion. As the sun set on Zheng He's final voyage, the political atmosphere back in the Ming court was as turbulent as a tempest at sea. You see, while our intrepid admiral was off dazzling foreign shores with his nautical prowess and leaving jaws agape with tales of giraffes and diplomacy, back home, the Ming dynasty was grappling with a hard-hitting reality. These voyages cost a pretty penny, and the empire's coin purse was starting to feel lighter than a feather in a monsoon. Let's talk cold, hard cash. The Ming treasury wasn't exactly swimming in doubloons, and each expedition drained resources faster than a marathon runner chugs water. Some estimates suggest that a single voyage could cost the equivalent of several 100,000 taels of silver. That's enough to keep an entire province in silk robes and rice wine for months, if not years. So, as one can imagine, the number crunchers in the emperor's court weren't exactly throwing a parade in Zheng He's honor. Instead, they were probably muttering under their breath about fiscal responsibility and the dangers of overextending imperial finances. But it wasn't just about money. Oh no, the court was a veritable shark tank of political intrigue, with factions jockeying for power like chess masters on a caffeine high. On one side, you had the pro-voyage crowd, who saw these expeditions as essential for maintaining China's prestige and reminding the world that the Middle Kingdom wasn't just a player, it was the player. They argued that the diplomatic ties and trade routes forged by Zheng He were worth the investment, a strategic play that kept China's neighbors in awe and its coffers lined with exotic goods. On the other side, however, were the naysayers, the bean counters, and the more conservative Confucian scholars who viewed these maritime escapades as little more than a costly vanity project. They argued that the resources could be better spent on fortifying the Great Wall or improving agricultural output. Why, they wondered, should the empire pour money into ventures that didn't directly benefit the heartland? To them, the voyages were akin to a royal midlife crisis, a flashy distraction from domestic issues that demanded attention. Amidst this fiscal and philosophical tug-of-war, the political winds began to shift. The Yongle emperor, Zhu Dai, had been Zheng He's staunchest supporter, the visionary behind the grand maritime endeavor. But as fate would have it, all empires must face the relentless march of time, and Zhu Dai was no exception. His death in 1424 marked the beginning of a period of introspection for the Ming dynasty. Without his charismatic leadership to rally the pro-expedition forces, the pendulum began to swing in favor of the more isolationist factions. Enter the Hongxi emperor, Zhu Geaji, Zhu Dai's son and successor, who was about as thrilled about the voyages as a cat is about a bath. A fiscal conservative to his core, Hongxi was less interested in projecting power across the ocean and more focused on consolidating it within China's borders. He ordered a halt to the construction of treasure ships, and in a move that must have felt like a punch to the gut for Zheng he grounded the fleet. Talk about a buzzkill. But let's not paint Hongxi as the villain of the piece. His concerns were valid. The empire was vast and diverse, with regions that needed attention and resources. There were internal threats to manage, like banditry and local uprisings, and the constant pressure of defending the northern frontier from Mongol incursions. In a world where communication moved at the speed of a horse, not a smartphone, it was a monumental task to keep such an expansive realm running smoothly. So, here we have it. A classic case of pragmatism versus prestige. A battle of ideologies played out in the hallowed halls of the Forbidden City. For Zheng He, who had devoted decades of his life to these voyages, it must have been a bitter pill to swallow. The very missions that had defined his career were now being scrutinized, their value questioned by those who had never set foot on a ship. Yet, even as the sails were furled and the ships docked, the legacy of Zheng He's voyages lingered like an ocean breeze. The networks established, and the knowledge gained had subtly interwoven themselves into the fabric of the Ming dynasty's worldview. Trade continued with the regions Zheng He had visited, albeit on a smaller scale, and the tales of his adventures inspired generations of Chinese mariners. But let's not get too misty-eyed. While the romantic allure of Zheng He's journeys persisted, the reality was that the Ming dynasty had decided to turn its gaze inward. The grand days of maritime exploration gave way to a period of consolidation and introspection. The treasure ships, once symbols of Chinese might, became relics of a bygone era, their timbers left to rot in shipyards as the empire focused on more terrestrial concerns. In the end, the story of Zheng He's voyages is one of ambition checked by practicality, a reminder that even the grandest dreams can be tempered by the stark realities of governance. It's a testament to the fact that history is rarely a straight line. It's a winding road full of detours, where visions of glory must often give way to the demands of the present. And while Zheng He may have been sidelined by the shifting political tides, his legacy continues to echo across the annals of history, a beacon of exploration and a cautionary tale of the costs of ambition. As the sun sets on this chapter, we find ourselves at a crossroads. The tale of Zheng He is far from over, and the story of the Ming dynasty continues to unfold. The next leg of our journey promises more intrigue, more drama, and perhaps a few more myths to bust. After all, history is nothing if not unpredictable, and the seas of time are vast and full of surprises. So, dear listener, stay with us as we sail onward, exploring the depths of this incredible saga and uncovering the truths that lie beneath the surface. So, as we set our sights on the horizon and bid adieu to the Ming dynasty's maritime escapades, one can't help but wonder, how did a fleet that once shook the very foundations of the known world slip into obscurity faster than a celebrity scandal in the age of the internet? This is where the myth of Zheng He takes center stage, a story that was lost to the sands of time, and then dramatically resurrected and romanticized centuries later, much like a Hollywood star making a comeback after a long lull. Here's the scoop. After Zheng He's final voyage in 1433, the Ming dynasty decided to hang up its sea boots and focus on internal affairs. Picture the Forbidden City, with bureaucrats scuttling around like ants, deciding the kingdom's fate over parts of tea. The Ming emperors who followed had little appetite for the costly seafaring ventures of their predecessors. The treasure ships, once the pride of the empire, were left to decay, their grandeur fading like an old photograph left in the sun. The records of these voyages were tucked away in dusty archives, and Zheng He himself faded from the collective memory like a pop song from last summer. Fast forward to the 20th century, a time when the world was rediscovering its own history in the wake of modernization. China, in the throes of re-establishing its identity, stumbled upon Zheng He's story in the attic of forgotten tales. It was the perfect narrative, a charismatic admiral who sailed the seas not for conquest, but for diplomacy and trade. A narrative that, much like a fine wine, improved with age. Here was a figure who could stand as a symbol of China's historical prowess, a counterpoint to Western tales of exploration and exploitation. Zheng He was reborn as a national hero, his story polished and packaged for a new era. But let's not get carried away with rose-tinted glasses. The reality of Zheng He's voyages was far more complex than the sanitized tales of peaceful exploration. His journeys were as much about power projection as they were about trade. The Ming dynasty wasn't just handing out silk and porcelain like party favors. It was flexing its muscles, ensuring that distant lands knew the weight of the dragon's gaze. Each port visit was a calculated display of might, the ships a testament to China's engineering prowess and military capabilities. The grandeur of Zheng He's fleet was not just for show, it was a reminder of the empire's reach and a warning to any who might think of challenging it. Now, let's dive into the economic ripple effects of these voyages, because, as we all know, money makes the world go round, even in the 15th century. Zheng He's expeditions helped lay the groundwork for a trade network that connected China to the Indian Ocean world, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures. Silk, spices, porcelain, and precious stones flowed along these routes, enriching the coffers of those savvy enough to capitalize on the opportunities. But while the voyages initially spurred economic activity, their abrupt cessation left a vacuum that others quickly filled. European powers, with their insatiable appetite for expansion, stepped in to dominate the seas in the centuries to follow, using maritime routes that Zheng He had helped to chart. This brings us to the broader canvas of global trade and diplomacy. Zheng He's voyages were a prelude to the age of exploration, a time when the world was on the cusp of becoming truly interconnected. His expeditions were a blueprint for future maritime endeavors, showcasing the potential of oceanic trade and cultural exchange. Yet they also highlighted the limitations of the Ming dynasty's vision. The decision to withdraw from maritime exploration left China on the sidelines as European powers carved up the world like a Thanksgiving turkey. The Ming's inward turn was a choice that would have ramifications for centuries, shaping the global balance of power in ways the emperors could never have foreseen. So where does this leave Zheng He's legacy? In many ways, his story is a microcosm of the Ming dynasty's aspirations and limitations, a tale of grand ambition tempered by pragmatic concerns. Zheng He embodied the spirit of exploration and the desire to project power, yet his voyages were ultimately constrained by the political and economic realities of his time. His life was a testament to the heights of human achievement and the harsh truths that often accompany it. He was a man of contradictions, a Muslim eunuch commanding a fleet in a Confucian court, a diplomat who negotiated with the threat of force, an explorer whose voyages were both celebrated and forgotten. As we wrap up this journey through the life and legacy of Zheng He, let's take a moment to appreciate the layers of history we've peeled back. His adventures remind us that history is not just a series of dates and events. It's a rich tapestry woven with the threads of human ambition, folly, and resilience. Zheng He's story, with its blend of romance and reality, invites us to look beyond the myths and see the complexities that define our past. It's a narrative that continues to resonate, challenging us to question our assumptions and explore the depths of history with curiosity and an open mind. In the end, Zheng He's voyages are more than just a footnote in the annals of history. They are a testament to the enduring spirit of exploration that drives humanity forward. So as we close the book on this chapter, remember that the seas of history are vast and full of untold stories waiting to be discovered. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep the spirit of curiosity alive. After all, in the grand tapestry of history, there's always another voyage on the horizon. Richard the Lionheart, the King of England who spent more time away from his kingdom than a rock star on a world tour. Born in 1157 in Oxfordshire, Richard was the third son of King Henry Roman II and Elena of Aquitaine, a formidable pair who would make any modern power couple look like amateurs. Richard's early life was a whirlwind of sibling rivalries that could outdo any soap opera. Picture it, 3 brothers, 1 crown, and enough backstabbing to make Game of Thrones look like a family picnic. Let's talk about languages for a moment. Richard grew up speaking Old French, the language of the nobility. English was as foreign to him as Klingon is to us today. In fact, the man could barely string together a sentence in English, yet he managed to rule the country. This was a time when being multilingual meant you spoke Latin, French, and maybe could curse in a few other tongues. The English language was for the commoners, not for a king who preferred to spend his days on the battlefield or in the courts of France. Honestly, it's like appointing someone who can't swim to be the captain of a ship. Richard's family life was a medieval version of keeping up with the Plantagenets. His mother, Elena, was the Duchess of Aquitaine and a political powerhouse. She had been married to Louis Roman VII of France, before ditching him for the more ambitious Henry Roman II. Talk about trading up. Elena and Henry's marriage was a strategic alliance, and their children were pawns in a grand game of European chess. Now, Richard wasn't the eldest son, which usually meant he was destined for a life in the church or as a sidekick to his older brother. But Richard was no altar boy. He was a warrior at heart, a fact he proved with his first military command at the age of 16 when he led an army against his father's vassals in Poitou. A teenage general, today he'd be grounded for missing curfew. But let's not rush past the family drama. Henry Roman II Empire was vast, and his control over his sons was tenuous at best. In 1173, Richard joined his brothers, Henry the young king and Geoffrey, in a rebellion against their father. Yes, you heard right, a full-blown rebellion. They were like the medieval Jonah's brothers, but with swords and a lot more animosity. The rebellion was eventually quashed, but it set the stage for Richard's lifelong quest for power and recognition. Fast forward to 1189. Henry Roman II dies, and Richard ascends to the throne. He immediately sets his sights on the Holy Land. The Third Crusade was calling, and Richard was not one to let the opportunity for glory pass him by. But crusades cost money. It's not like you can just book a flight and airbomb your way through the Middle East. So, how did Richard finance his grand adventure? By putting England up for sale, of course. It's true, he reportedly said he'd sell London if he could find a buyer. Imagine putting Big Ben on eBay. In reality, Richard raised funds by selling titles, offices, and lands. He even sold the office of the Bishop of Winchester, because why not? It was a medieval fire sale, and everything had to go. The king's willingness to auction off England's assets speaks volumes about where his priorities lay. Spoiler alert, they weren't in England. His brother John, now there's a name you might recognize, was left to keep the home fires burning, which is a little like leaving the family dog in charge of dinner. But let's circle back to Richard's character. The romantic image of him as the chivalrous Lionheart is hard to resist, yet the reality was a bit grittier. He was ruthless, pragmatic, and as interested in the spoils of war as any conqueror. But he was also a brilliant military strategist, a fact that would become abundantly clear during his crusades. Richard's charisma was as sharp as his sword, and he knew how to inspire loyalty among his men. So, what made Richard tick? Power, glory, and perhaps a touch of hubris. The Crusades were more than just a religious mission. They were a chance to carve out a legacy. For Richard, the Holy Land wasn't just a destination. It was a stage on which to perform. And perform he did, but that's a tale for another day. As we wrap up this chapter of Richard's early life, remember that behind every legendary king is a tangled web of family feuds, political machinations, and the occasional fire sale of national assets. Richard's story is a testament to the idea that sometimes history's heroes are as flawed and fascinating as any fictional character. Stay tuned, because things are just starting to heat up. So, just as the ink was drying on Richard's royal ascension papers, he was already mapping out his epic journey to the Holy Land. The Third Crusade was more than just an expedition. It was a medieval reality show where survival, strategy, and a flair for drama were all in a day's work. Richard was ready to showcase his military prowess, but first he needed to get there, and that meant crossing the English Channel, a logistical nightmare even before you consider the seasickness. Richard's entourage was no weekend camping trip. We're talking about a military machine with thousands of soldiers, knights, and enough horses to start a cavalry-themed amusement park. Estimates suggest he had around 17,000 troops at his disposal. That's like trying to feed and house the population of a small town while on the move. And let's not forget the sheer volume of stuff they carried. Weapons, armor, supplies, and of course, a king's wardrobe that would have made a rock star blush. No wonder Richard's men called him Coeur de Lion. Only a lion-hearted leader would attempt such a feat. Now, financing this expedition was no small feat. Crusades weren't just expensive, they were the medieval equivalent of burning money while throwing a lavish party on a yacht. Richard's creative accounting methods went beyond selling off England's assets. He imposed a special tax called the Saladin Tithe, which was basically a mandatory donation to the Let's Take Back the Holy Land Fund. Imagine telling your subjects they had to pay for a war they'd never see. It's a miracle he didn't face a rebellion right then and there. But let's talk logistics. Transporting an army across Europe wasn't as simple as booking a couple of trains. Richard's forces had to navigate through politically charged territories where every border crossing was an exercise in diplomacy and negotiation. Think of it as a medieval road trip with toll booths manned by slightly hostile gatekeepers. Richard managed to secure passage through France, the Holy Roman Empire, and into Italy, where he and his men finally set sail for Sicily, a pit stop that would make even the most seasoned traveler weary. In Sicily, Richard's temper flared like a Mediterranean summer. The island was embroiled in its own political drama, and Richard soon found himself at odds with Tancred of Lex, the current king, over the treatment of his sister Joan, the Queen of Sicily. Richard's solution: storm Messina, sack the city, and force Tancred into submission. The man knew how to make an entrance. This aggressive diplomacy netted him a handsome ransom and supplies, proof that sometimes the stick works better than the carrot. From Sicily, it was on to the Holy Land, but not before a detour to Cyprus. Here, Richard's penchant for conquest took center stage again. The island was ruled by Isaac Comnenos, a man who had as much control over his domain as a cat herder with a broken arm. Richard, tired of Isaac's shenanigans and eager to secure a strategic base, decided to take Cyprus by force. Spoiler alert, he succeeded. With the island under his belt, Richard sold it to the Knights Templar, turning a tidy profit that would help fund his crusade. If medieval kings had LinkedIn profiles, Richard's would read king, conqueror, opportunistic real estate mogul. Finally, Richard landed at Acre in 1191, where he joined forces with other crusading leaders, including Philip Roman II of France. Their mission: reclaim Jerusalem from Saladin, the formidable Muslim leader who had already proven himself a master strategist. But before they could even think about Jerusalem, they had to secure Acre, a city that had been under siege for 2 years. Richard's arrival was like pouring gasoline on a bonfire. Within weeks, the city fell. It was a testament to his military skill, but also a grim reminder of the brutality of war. The aftermath saw thousands of prisoners executed when negotiations with Saladin stalled, a decision that would haunt Richard's legacy. Let's pause to appreciate the economic realities of this crusade. Feeding an army was no walk in the park, especially in a foreign land. A knight's daily rations included several pounds of bread and meat, gallons of wine, and grain for their horses, luxuries by any standard. The cost, astronomical. Richard's army consumed resources at a rate that would make a modern corporate budget officer break out in hives. And with supply lines stretched thinner than a medieval tapestry, every skirmish risked cutting off their lifeline. Despite these challenges, Richard's strategic genius shone through. He reorganized the crusading forces, ensuring that discipline and efficiency prevailed over chaos. His ability to inspire and lead was undeniable, even if his methods were sometimes ruthless. Yet for all his brilliance, Richard was also his own worst enemy. His legendary temper and penchant for confrontation often alienated allies, turning potential friends into adversaries. If he had a motto, it might have been "Diplomacy is for the weak." Yet, for all the romanticism of the Lionheart, the reality was far more complex. Richard's crusade was as much about personal glory as it was about religious duty. The Holy Land was a stage, and Richard was determined to be the star. But as history has shown time and again, the path to glory is often littered with the debris of ambition, and Richard's journey was no exception. The Third Crusade was just heating up, and the Holy Land was about to become a crucible for the Lionheart's legacy. As we leave Richard amidst the dust and clamour of his crusade, remember that history often paints its heroes with broad strokes, glossing over the details that reveal their true nature. Richard was a king driven by power, a warrior fueled by ambition, and a man whose legacy would be debated for centuries. But for now, the Holy Land awaited, and Richard was more than ready to leave his mark. Stay tuned, because the story of Richard the Lionheart is far from over. And so, with Richard, the Lionheart poised to carve his name into the annals of history, we find ourselves on the precipice of one of medieval warfare's most fascinating confrontations: Richard versus Saladin. If you're picturing this as a chivalric bromance where two knights exchange friendship bracelets amidst the chaos of battle, well, buckle up. The reality was more like a high-stakes chess game, with both players ready to flip the board at any moment. Now, Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, was no slouch when it came to military strategy. Like Richard, he too had a flair for the dramatic, albeit with a bit more finesse. Born in Tikrit in 1137, Saladin rose to power through a combination of military prowess and shrewd political maneuvering. By the time Richard arrived, Saladin had already unified the Muslim Near East and reclaimed Jerusalem in 1187. His victory at the Battle of Hattin was a masterclass in tactics, where he managed to lure the Crusader forces into the arid wilderness and decimate them with calculated precision. So, was Saladin the noble, courteous opponent that romantic tales would have us believe? Sure, if you're into enemies who occasionally send you fruit baskets. But let's not forget, this was war, not a garden party. Richard and Saladin never actually met face to face, a fact that seems to disappoint every Hollywood screenwriter ever. Instead, their relationship was conducted through a series of envoys and letters that were more about strategic posturing than swapping recipes. They admired each other's prowess from afar, each recognizing a worthy adversary, but that's where the bromance ends. Think more Cold War than Casablanca. The Third Crusade was a logistical nightmare, a swirling vortex of alliances and betrayals that would make Machiavelli proud. Richard's forces were a patchwork quilt of nationalities and motivations. From the English knights seeking glory to the mercenaries who'd fight your grandmother if the price was right. Maintaining unity was like herding cats armed with swords. The gritty truth of medieval warfare wasn't all glinting armor and noble charges. It was brutal, dirty, and often tedious. Take the siege of Acre, where Richard's forces spent months entrenched in a grueling stalemate, digging trenches and building siege towers. The conditions were so dire that dysentery, rather than enemy swords, claimed more lives. It was the kind of hellscape that makes you appreciate indoor plumbing and antibiotics. When Acre finally fell in 1191, Richard's ruthlessness reared its head. With negotiations dragging on like a poorly executed sitcom, he ordered the execution of 700 Muslim prisoners. It was a strategic move meant to send a message to Saladin, though it's hard to imagine anyone viewing it as a diplomatic masterstroke. It did, however, underline the stark realities of medieval warfare. Mercy was often a luxury, not a given. As the crusade dragged on, both sides found themselves in a strategic deadlock, and the absurdity of war became painfully clear. Here were two of the greatest military minds of their age, locked in an endless cycle of skirmishes and sieges, while the sands of time and patience ran out. Saladin was a master at avoiding direct confrontation, preferring to wear down Richard's forces with guerrilla tactics and scorched earth policies. Richard, on the other hand, was all about the bold, decisive strike, like a medieval version of an action movie hero with a penchant for grand gestures. Negotiating truces became a bit like trying to untangle a medieval Gordian knot. Picture weary envoys huddled in candlelit tents, trying to hash out peace terms, while one side's knights sharpened their swords and the others prepared their bows. Sure, there were moments of chivalry. Saladin famously sent Richard fresh fruit and snow to help him recover from a fever. But these were tactical niceties, not the foundation of a lasting peace. Economic realities of maintaining a crusader army were as harsh as the desert sun. Richard's coffers were draining faster than a leaky bucket, and the financial strain was palpable. After all, you can't keep the troops fed on charisma alone. The costs of war were staggering, with estimates suggesting that Richard's crusade burned through the equivalent of millions of today's dollars. The pressure was mounting, and even the Lionheart couldn't ignore the ticking clock of economic ruin. As the months wore on, exhaustion set in on both sides. Soldiers longed for home, their dreams of glory dulled by the relentless grind of war. It was a far cry from the romanticized tales of noble crusaders and virtuous battles. Instead, it was the grim reality of clashing ambitions, where the line between heroism and futility blurred in the desert heat. For all the legendary status of Richard and Saladin, their conflict was a testament to the futility of war, where victories were fleeting and losses steep. The myth of the noble crusade often glosses over the harsh truth that even the greatest warriors are at the mercy of time, logistics, and the very human capacity for exhaustion. As the Third Crusade reached its crescendo, the Holy Land was less a stage for legendary heroes and more a cauldron of conflicting desires and relentless attrition. Richard was a king far from home, driven by a desire for eternal glory, while Saladin was a leader defending his territory with a tenacity that was as strategic as it was personal. So, as we leave Richard and Saladin larked in their eternal dance of strategy and survival, remember that history's heroes are as much products of their time as they are architects of their destiny. The legend of Richard the Lionheart is a tapestry of ambition, strategy, and the unmistakable human penchant for myth-making. And while their story is far from over, the next chapter promises to reveal even more about the intricate web of power, politics, and the relentless march of history. Stay tuned, because the adventure is only just beginning. As the dust of the Third Crusade began to settle, Richard the Lionheart found himself facing a new challenge: getting home. This wasn't a simple matter of booking a return flight and calling an Uber. Oh no, Richard's journey home was more akin to a medieval episode of Survivor, with a dash of Pirates of the Caribbean thrown in for good measure. First, there was the matter of the sea. The Mediterranean wasn't exactly what you'd call a gentle mistress, and Richard was about to learn that the hard way. On his way back to England, in late 1192, his fleet was scattered by a storm, proving that Mother Nature had as much of a flair for drama as Richard himself. His ship was wrecked off the coast of modern-day Italy, forcing him to take a very unkingly detour overland through Europe, a route fraught with more danger than a Game of Thrones wedding. Now, here's where things went from bad to worse. Richard, a king with more enemies than friends, found himself in the territory of Duke Leopold V of Austria. If you remember, Richard had previously insulted Leopold during the Crusade by tearing down his banner at Acre, a medieval faux pas equivalent to unfriending someone on Facebook in front of all your mutual friends. So, when Richard tried to sneak through Leopold's backyard in disguise, he was about as inconspicuous as a lion in a chicken coop. Captured in December 1192, Richard's troubles were just beginning. Leopold, recognizing a prime opportunity to make some cash and settle a score, handed Richard over to Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. And so began Richard's extended stay in European dungeons, which lasted until February 1194. Forget any romantic notions of a noble king wrongfully imprisoned. This was a political chess game where Richard was the king in check. Now, let's talk ransom. Richard's release came with a price tag that would give even the wealthiest monarch pause. The demand: a cool 150,000 marks, equivalent to about 2 to 3 times the annual income of the English crown at the time, or roughly $3 billion in today's money. That's right, this ransom made modern celebrity bailouts look like pocket change. So how did England foot the bill? Well, through a combination of taxes, contributions from the church, and loans. The country was basically turned upside down in a desperate bid to free its king. The English subjects, already feeling the financial squeeze from crusade expenses, were now being asked to dig even deeper. Imagine being told you have to pay for your boss's extravagant vacation and his subsequent bail. Hardly the stuff of fairy tales. But was it worth it? From a purely financial standpoint, not really. The economy took a hit that it would struggle to recover from for years. Politically, however, it was another story. Richard's absence had opened the door for his brother John to plot and scheme his way into power, a subplot that would later inspire countless stories about the wicked Prince John and the noble Robin Hood. By returning, Richard reasserted his authority and quelled John's ambitions, at least temporarily. Richard's captivity also had broader implications for European politics. It exposed the fragility of alliances and the ruthlessness of power struggles between monarchs. The Holy Roman Emperor's decision to imprison a fellow Christian king during a time when unity against Muslim forces was supposedly paramount highlighted the hypocrisy and complexity of medieval European diplomacy. Richard's extended stay in a dungeon rather than on a throne paints a vivid picture of the era's unpredictability. The very notion of kingship was more about personal charisma and military might than governing from a palace. Richard's reign was characterized by his absence, a reminder that medieval kingship was as much about presence on the battlefield as it was about sitting on a throne. So why does Richard the Lionheart endure in popular memory as a larger-than-life figure? Perhaps it's because his story is one of contradictions and complexities, a tapestry woven with threads of romance, brutality, and survival. His journey home was less about the destination and more about the trials along the way, trials that revealed the true nature of power, loyalty, and the human spirit. Even after his release, Richard didn't rush back to England. Instead, he lingered in Normandy, dealing with the political fallout of his absence and ensuring his dominion was secure. It wasn't until March 1194 that he finally set foot back in England, greeted as a hero by subjects who had paid dearly for his freedom. But Richard, ever the restless warrior, didn't stay put for long. He was soon off again, embroiled in conflicts on the continent that would occupy him until his death in 1199. As we wrap up this chapter of Richard's misadventures, remember that history's appeal lies not in its certainties, but in its complexities. Richard was a king who spent more time in chains and on the battlefield than in his own kingdom, yet he remains an enduring symbol of chivalric idealism. His life was a saga of ambition and adversity, a reminder that the road to glory is often paved with pitfalls. And while his story is far from over, the next part promises to unravel even more about the enigmatic Lionheart and the world he left behind. Stay tuned, because the legend is still unfolding. And just like that, Richard the Lionheart was back on English soil, greeted with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect for a king whose return was as anticipated as the latest blockbuster sequel. But this wasn't a simple homecoming. It was more like the opening act of a rock band's comeback tour, complete with cheering crowds and a nation eager to see if the main act could still hit all the high notes. Once the dust had settled and the initial fanfare died down, Richard found himself in an unfamiliar role, actually being king. For a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than on the throne, this was a bit like asking a race car driver to take up knitting. But Richard wasn't about to let a little thing like governing slow him down. He was soon back in France, where the real action was, because, let's face it, England was more like a side hustle at this point. In France, Richard resumed his eternal battle with Philip Roman II, the King of France. If their rivalry had a theme song, it would be Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better. Richard was determined to outmaneuver Philip at every turn, and for a while he succeeded. His military campaigns were marked by a series of skirmishes and sieges that showcased his tactical brilliance. Castles changed hands like trading cards, and Richard's reputation as a formidable warrior only grew. Yet, the cost of these campaigns was as steep as the cliffs of Dover, draining England's coffers of 11,000 pounds of silver annually. That's about $20 million today, making it clear that Richard's battles were as much about ego as they were about territory. But the thing about living life on the edge is that eventually you find yourself dangling over it. In 1199, Richard was besieging the castle of Chalice-Jabral in France, a minor fort that should have been a footnote in his illustrious career. Instead, it became the final chapter. While surveying the battlements, Richard took an arrow to the shoulder, a seemingly minor wound that quickly turned septic. In the days before antibiotics, this was a death sentence, and on April 6, 1199, Richard succumbed to his injury at the age of 41. He died as he lived, in the thick of battle, far from the comforts of home, and probably cursing the gods for his bad luck. Richard's death left England in a precarious position. His brother John inherited the throne, a man whose reputation was about as sterling as a tarnished spoon. If Richard was the Lionheart, John was more like the housecat, lacking his brother's charisma and military prowess, but making up for it with cunning and ambition. Richard's absence left a power vacuum that John would struggle to fill, leading to a reign marked by rebellion and the infamous Magna Carta. But that, dear listeners, is a tale for another day. As for Richard, his legacy was cemented as one of England's most romanticized kings. The moniker, the Lionheart, conjures images of a noble warrior, a gallant knight whose exploits have been immortalized in ballads and legends. Yet the reality was far more complicated. Richard was a king who spent less than 6 months of his decade-long reign in England. He was more concerned with expanding his territories in France and pursuing personal glory than with the day-to-day governance of his kingdom. So why, you might ask, does Richard continue to be hailed as a hero? Part of it is the allure of the Crusader myth, the idea of a king who fought for a higher cause, albeit one mixed with personal ambition. But another part is pure medieval PR. Richard knew the value of image and exploited it masterfully. Through his deeds and daring, he crafted a narrative of chivalry and bravery that resonated with his contemporaries and continues to captivate us today. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous aspects. Richard's reign was marked by financial strain, political neglect of his English subjects, and a legacy built on the backs of those who paid for his adventures. His priorities were often questionable, driven by a thirst for glory rather than the welfare of his people. Yet, isn't this the paradox of leadership throughout history? The line between heroism and hubris is a thin one, easily blurred by the passage of time and the power of storytelling. In the end, Richard the Lionheart was both hero and opportunist, a man of his time whose exploits have taken on a life of their own. He was a king who fought for his place in history, and in doing so, left a legacy as enduring as the castles he built and the battles he won. Whether he was a true hero or merely a savvy self-promoter is a question for the ages. But one thing is certain. Richard's story is a testament to the enduring power of myth and the complexities of human ambition. As we close the book on Richard's reign, let's remember that history is seldom black and white. It's a tapestry of triumphs and failures, of legends and truths interwoven through the ages. Richard the Lionheart remains a symbol of chivalry and courage, yet his reign serves as a reminder that even the most revered figures are not immune to the flaws and follies that make us all human. So, here's to Richard, the king who lived like a lion and left us with tales that still roar through the annals of time.